Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers. Chapter 89. Chapter 89. Seemingly just a few days ago, Zhang Xing had accompanied the victorious Guanliang Han into the capital city, and now he had once again contributed a great meritorious service. Although Guanliang Han's private deployment of troops was illegal and violated the emperor's command, the lives of the people were of prime importance. Therefore, attending to the situation had been of high priority. The imperial court had not, as of yet, issued a decree punishing those involved, which clearly indicated the emperor's opinion. This crime did not override the meritorious service. Guanliang Han was a seasoned veteran of numerous battles, and was even known as the god of war in the Great Jin dynasty. Thus, this state of affairs was not very important to him. However, for Zhang Xing, who had appeared out of nowhere with great achievement, it was a different matter. He had already been promoted to deputy general at a young age, and this situation was like the icing on the cake. Those who were interested in such matters postulated that Zhang Xing's official career would skyrocket in future. No one could have imagined that the Zhang family, which had produced generations of civilian court officials, would in Zhang Xing start a new generation of military leaders. On brocade, add flowers, to decorate something already perfect / gilding the lily. Hence, over the past few days, there had been an endless stream of horse carriages outside the Jiangfu, all making formal visits to court the favor of Jiang Quan. Jiang Quan wiped his perspiring brow in secret. Everyone in the Grand Counselor Fu had been incarcerated, and the situation was a total disaster. Even if, by some fluke, the Li family were finally released, they would never again be able to regain their former glory and favor. In addition, the power and influence of 8th Prince had been damaged. At this moment, no one in the imperial court, no matter their rank, dared to act rashly, and even the Xia family was silent. The Zhang family depended on the Xia family, who in turn depended on Xianli. If problems were to arise with respect to Xianli, then the Jiangfu would definitely have no future. Jiang Quan had initially been deeply worried about this, but Zhang Xing had emerged like a bolt from the blue, and to his shocked surprise, the Jiangfu, on the verge of collapse, found itself in a flourishing situation. His feelings towards the colleagues who paid him formal visits and observed the social niceties in order to curry favor with him were complicated. If it were Jiang Chao who was bringing glory to the Zhang family, that would be fine, but it was Zhang Xing. At present, Zhang Xing could indeed be seen as bringing the Jiangfu plenty of benefits, but he had been very arrogant and condescending upon his return to the Fu. If he really did gain the emperor's favor in future, wouldn't he rebel against the Jiangfu? Jiang Quan had never paid attention to this eldest son, but he was now proving himself more and more capable with each passing day. If in future all the Jiang family property should fall into his hands, there would be no place for Jiang Chao or Jiang Susu. When he thought about this, a trace of gloom flashed across Jiang Quan's eyes. While Jiang Quan was sorting out his complex feelings, there were people in an even worse state than he was. Ever since the collapse of Bochang Reservoir, the number of cups and saucers smashed to smithereens in Yanhua Yuan and Su Xian Yuan was steadily mounting. Xia Yan just happened to be bedridden due to the cold, but the people in the Fu were whispering that the cause of her illness was her ill temper at Zhang Xing's rendering of meritorious service. Once again, the whispers grew and spread, and somehow even spread to the streets and alleys of the capital. Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers. Tongues were wagging all over the city, saying, "Look, even Xia Yan, who had been widely feted as a talented woman in those days, was unable to avoid becoming a petty, jealous woman once she entered the Fu." They said that her usually dignified and imposing aura and her tolerant attitude were all for show, otherwise, why would she fall ill when eldest young Master Zhang rendered such a great service? This rumor made its way around the capital, eventually returning to the Jiangfu. Almost the next day, Xia Yan recovered from her illness. Xia Yan recovered, but Jiang Chao fell ill again. He shut himself in his courtyard and refused to go out. The main residents also fell victim to this atmosphere. As a result, whenever the Yinyangs and other daughters of the Jiangfu encountered Zhang Ruan, they treated her as something like a taboo. No matter what the attitude of the other people in the Jiangfu was like, Zhang Xing and Zhang Ruan were happy and content. If there was someone else in the Fu who was also happy, then it would be the old Zhang madam. The old Zhang madam was constantly ill in bed, for she was after all a person in her 60s. When illness struck her, it was always severe, and her recovery was extremely slow. When she heard that Zhang Xinji had been promoted to deputy general and returned to the Fu, she was very happy. However, after Zhang Xinji's return to the capital, he was kept busy with military matters, and the old Zhang madam found it challenging to get up and walk due to the frailty of her body. Thus, with great impatience, she called for Zhang Xinji and Zhang Ruan to visit her. Bing Lai are you Shan Dao, Bing Chu are you Cho Si. Lit. When illness strikes, it's like a mountain falling. Recovery is as slow as the pace at which silk is spun by the silkworm. In Guilan Yuan, the old Zhang madam surveyed the extraordinary youngsters before her with satisfaction. She was already advanced in age, and while she had previously doted on Zhang Chao, who had been brought up in her presence from a young age, he had disappointed her repeatedly in recent times. On the other hand, this Zhang Xinji had returned to the capital after a great victory, which caused her to sit up and take note of him. In contrast to the old Zhang madam's warm and friendly demeanor, Zhang Xinji was polite but seemed somewhat awkward and distant. He exhibited plenty of courtesy, but little of the familiarity of close relations. Over time, the old Zhang madam could see Zhang Xinji's attitude, and her expression slowly became less amiable. Moreover, Zhang Xinji had been trained and toughened up by his military experiences, so he calmly ignored the old Zhang madam's deliberate silence. Zhang Ruan was even less likely to say anything, and merely sat in silence without uttering a word. The old Zhang madam both explicitly and implicitly reminded Zhang Xinji that he had to help the Zhang family. If he could, he should also help Zhang Chao, as he, Zhang Xinji, was most likely to inherit the Zhang Fu, and Zhang Chao was, for better or for worse, his younger brother. Zhang Xinji remained calm and maneuvered the situation so that the words rebounded without him making any promises. Deluji Taiji. Lit. To make a Tai Chi move. Tai Chi is a Chinese martial art which has many different styles, often characterized by graceful, sweeping hand motions. In colloquial terms, for someone to make a Tai Chi move is to push away a responsibility or a suggestion in an expert manner. More about Tai Chi here. All her life, the old Zhang madam had been remarkably astute. When she perceived that Zhang Ruan and Zhang Xinji were this stubborn, she was naturally somewhat displeased. She offered a few more words in line with conventional greetings, but her manner gradually became increasingly frosty. Finally, she waved them away, saying she was tired. After they had taken their leave, she said to Kai Chiao, who was by her side, "I had thought that he would be a valuable treasure, but it turns out that he shows no understanding of the times and is not amenable to reason. Eldest young master has some resentment towards Furin. Once this resentment has passed, he will be all right. After all, he is still family," Kai Chiao said persuasively. "What resentment? It is clearly hatred." The old Zhang madam sighed deeply and said, "Well, let them torment each other all they like. Xia Yin should suffer as well." Although she doted on Zhang Chao, she was not actually set on him. In the end, Zhang Quan was not her own child, and she only sought to protect the glory of the Zhang Fu. In her opinion, whether it was Zhang Chao or Zhang Xinji in charge of the Fu in future, it made no difference. When Zhang Ruan and Zhang Xinji walked out of Guilan Yuan, Zhang Ruan said, "Zumu is probably angry with you." "I don't give a damn about the Zhang Fu's position," said Zhang Xinji in a low voice. "What's more helping the Fu?" "It would be best if you do not need to," said Zhang Ruan with a smile. "Because the Zhang Fu would eventually collapse one day. Was there any need for dying people to waste time and effort chasing after prosperity and beautiful things while they are alive?" As she said this, she noticed a flash of clothing from within the garden. Zhang Ruan smiled slightly, then abruptly raised her voice and said, "Since Zumu wants to recognize Dage as the eventual heir of the Zhang Fu, then this must be the will of her heart. Dage will have to seriously consider it." Zhang Xinji was slightly taken aback, but seemed to understand the situation when he looked at Zhang Ruan's expression. He smiled along with her and said, "Exactly." The flash of clothing amidst the bushes swiftly vanished. Zhang Ruan and Zhang Xinji exchanged glances and laughed. These two siblings of the Zhang Fu were taking things easy, but naturally there were people who were not enjoying such leisure. For example, the Grand Counselor Fu, which had been seized and searched, and the Li family who had been incarcerated. All the people in the Grand Counselor Fu had been imprisoned, with the sole exception of Lian because the Li family's second young master had fled, afraid of being caught as a criminal. The entire capital had been searched from front to back, but no one had so much as caught a glimpse of his shadow. This was a major event in the capital, and people were being searched every day by the bailiffs. The Li family's second young master had always been highly intelligent, therefore, no one knew where he was hiding. As he was also very cautious, it would probably be hard to capture him. In an alley in the slums of the capital, there was a filthy and dilapidated inn. The continuous rain had rendered half of the roof useless, and as the wind and rain battered the structure, the inn looked as though it would collapse the very next second. A man in gray clothes walked in. The innkeeper was at that moment resting his head on the table for a nap, for he had not expected that anyone would enter at this time. He hurriedly and courteously welcomed the guest, saying, "Sir, are you here to stay or for a meal? I want a middle room." The gray-clad man fished out a piece of broken silver and said, "Send food to my room." Having said this, he walked up the stairs. The inn was old and in a sad state of disrepair, and since it was located in a dark alley in the slums, the rich would never deign to stay in such a place, while the poor had no money to do so. Thus there were very few guests in the inn. The innkeeper smilingly agreed and also went up the stairs to look for a room for this gray-clad guest. After he led him to a room, the innkeeper went back down the stairs while the gray-clad man shut the door. He slowly took off his flapping, filthy, and gray outer clothing to expose an elegant face, except his expression held a touch of malevolence and gloom. This was none other than Lian. The highly intelligent and arrogant Lian had been reduced to nothing but a stray dog, hiding in every possible corner in order to escape the authorities' pursuit. From a young age, people had always praised him, calling him the hope of the Grand Counselor Fu. He was totally contemptuous of Li Yang, a profligate rake who enjoyed whoring, and he disdained Li Dong, whose lifestyle was utterly hedonistic. He wanted to be a master of others and enjoy their worshipful gazes. In fact, he had achieved this, so he did not expect that one day he would suffer such a terrible defeat, especially at the hands of such a young girl. Over the past few days, he had carefully gone through the entire sequence of events in his mind. In the end, he had come to the conclusion that all of it had been orchestrated by Zhang Ruan. He could barely conceal his shock. From the time that Zhang Ruan had castrated Li Yang, it seemed as if she had been moving step by step through a plan to target the Li family. However, no matter what her reason might be, this kind of naked provocation had caused the Grand Counselor Fu to suffer such a huge loss. How could Lian take this lying down? Most of all, recently news had been spreading around the marketplace that the emperor had seen the countless valuables and precious jewels that had been in the Grand Counselor Fu, clearly more than what was in the national treasury. The emperor was furious and filled with murderous rage, and wanted to execute the whole family and confiscate their property within the next few days. Although this was just a rumor, it had originated from the palace. No one could tell truth from falsehood, but Lian himself was certain that, even if it was only for the reason of filling up the national treasury, the emperor would very likely demand the lives of the people of the Grand Counselor Fu. However, if this happened, the Grand Counselor Fu would absolutely lose the possibility of changing its fortune. This was not acceptable. He had to do something. He could not sit and wait for death. He could not watch the Grand Counselor Fu collapse due to such a small thing as a reservoir. He had already made some inquiries and found out that, since the heavy rainfall had yet to stop, many rich families in the capital were frequently visiting the most famous temple to pray, Baoguang Temple. Moreover, the day after tomorrow, Zhang Ruan would set off together with the other young ladies from the Zhang family to donate some money for incense. Baoguang Temple was located far away from the capital, on Shui Cliff. The mountains were high and the valleys were deep, and the journey was long. For this reason, the incense that was offered by those who had braved this journey was considered potent, as people believed their actions proved one's sincerity of heart. That all the young ladies of the Jiangfu were visiting Baoguang Temple was undoubtedly an excellent opportunity. He had to turn the tables before the emperor made a decision on the Grand Counselor Fu. This meant that he had to get to Zhangruan first. However, nowadays not only could he not appear openly, He needed to find a way to get close to her. The only way was to seize her and then get her to admit that it was all a conspiracy. Lian had always relied on stratagems to harm people, and had never before made such a decision to take direct action. However, at present this was the only way. This would be the first time he was undertaking a task personally, and he believed that there would be no way for Zhang Ruan to escape. Slowly, he withdrew something that looked like a bronze medal from within his clothes. It was about the size of his palm, and was exquisitely made. Lian gripped it tightly in his hand, then laughed unhurriedly. Chapter 91. Chapter 91. In the capital, the spring rain looked as if it was about to stop, but then suddenly it became heavier. Prior hopes for its abatement were dashed, and people were bitterly disappointed. All day long, the common people were praying to the gods and asking Buddha for help, hoping that the heavens would not continue to punish the great Jin dynasty. However, the heavens do not heed man's wishes, and it continued to rain as intensely as before. Xia Yan proposed that the Jiangfu daughters should visit Baoguang Temple to pray for blessings. Firstly, because at this time every year, the Jiang family would visit Baoguang Temple to make a donation by purchasing incense, and then seeking Buddha's blessing and protection. Secondly, Baoguang Temple was the most famous temple in the capital, and was known to be very effective in answering prayers, especially where Tuzhu incense was concerned. Every year, countless people would be engaged in endless disputes over the Tuzhu incense. However, this year, due to the rain, there were much fewer disputes than usual. In general, burning incense is an act of worship. Tuzhu Xiang involves an ancient custom, where people rush to offer incense on the first day of the new year, believing that this first offering of incense has the greatest merit and will be blessed the most. Worshippers will rush to the temple, and may fight to be the first person to offer incense to show their piety. However, in this text it seems that this incense can be offered at other times of the year as well. When Xia Yan made this suggestion, Zhang Ruan was very quick to agree. Lu Zhu said nervously, "Miss, she clearly has bad intentions. Why did Miss agree so readily?" Baoguang Temple was in the mountainous region, and there were many dangers along the route there. Since the rain was at present bombarding the earth, the mud road would be more unstable, and the journey would be even more challenging. The rich people who usually visited the temple all shrank back from undertaking such a journey, yet Xia Yan had proposed going there to offer Tuzhu incense. Surely the situation was more complex than it seemed. "It's all right." Zhang Ruan smiled faintly and said, "The clamshells are sealed too tightly, so it's difficult to find a way to take action. Now that they have opened up of their own accord, how can we not seize the opportunity?" Lu Zhu had found out that Xia Yan had gone out in the morning, and had not returned until evening. When she returned, there was something peculiar about her expression, and she straightaway went to Su Xian Yuan, where she had spoken with Jiang Su for a long time before eventually returning to her own courtyard. "Clamshells?" Lu Zhu was taken aback. "Does Miss want to? Tomorrow you will go out with me." Zhang Ruan beckoned for her to come over, then whispered several commands into her ear. When Lu Zhu heard them, her face went through several changes of expression before she said, "Miss, you can't do this, it's too dangerous. How can you catch a tiger cub if you don't enter the tiger's lair?" Zhang Ruan said. "Besides, it's not as if there is absolutely no possibility of success." Lu Zhu bit her lip. Finally, amid the turbulence in her heart, she said, "This servant will listen to Mississippi." Zhang Ruan smiled faintly. The hot tea before her sent up spirals of mist. This would be her second time visiting Baoguang Temple. The first time had been 5 years ago, when she had wanted to fight over the Tuzhu incense, hoping that Zhao Mei would quickly recover from her illness. However, she had not managed to win the Tuzhu incense, and Zhao Mei's condition did not improve. In this lifetime she did not believe in gods or Buddhas. She would begin her bloody revenge in this Buddhist sacred place. "Lian." She slowly lowered her head. The steam from the tea rose up in spirals, obscuring her face. One could only see a pair of clear, glistening eyes, which flashed fiercely for a split second, while her rosy lips ticked up at the corners. "Wait patiently." Huiju had been extremely at ease the past few days. In order to protect him, Guanliang Han had invited him to stay in the Guanfu. and had even casually assigned him a bodyguard. Although Huiju was puzzled, he assumed that Guanliang Han and the person behind Zhang Ruan were one and the same, and thus did not overly concern himself with the situation. After the reservoir incident, his popularity in the capital was extremely high, and many of the aristocratic families had invited him to visit them so they could bask in the reflected glory. However, Zhang Ruan had sent him a letter through an intermediary, asking him to keep a low profile, and suggesting that it would be best to keep his public appearances to a minimum. At first, Huiju was discontented. Later, though, he understood that a large part of the reason why people worship gods and Buddha is the mystery involved. Nowadays, the more popular he became, the more he had to protect his mysterious aura. Zhang Ruan had said, in order to accomplish big things, one could not covet small gains. If one were exceedingly cautious now, one would enjoy great riches and honor in future. Huiju regarded Zhang Ruan's words as precious treasures to be revered, so he naturally complied with them. Every day he engaged in silent meditation in the Guanfu, and very rarely went out. Today he was standing in front of the window wiping clean his wooden fish when he saw Guanliang Han chasing after a black-clad young man along the long corridor beyond the flower garden of the Guanfu, towards the entrance. As he hurried he shouted, "Third brother, what are you using my troops for again? No way, absolutely no way, what do you take my Guan family troops for? Damn you! Stop right there!" Muyu. Literally wooden fish. An elaborately carved wooden drum struck with a padded wooden stick during Buddhist chanting services. Fish, since they never sleep, symbolize the alertness and watchfulness needed to attain Buddhahood. These are two kinds of wooden fish. One is round in shape with scales carved on it. The other is rectangle in shape, suspended in front of the dining hall of a Buddhist temple. When having breakfast and lunch, the monks beat it to produce rhythm. Huiju adhered to the principle. See no evil, hear no evil, and thus he closed the window with a snap. Fei liemo shi, fei liemo ting. This is an abridged version of the Confucian analect. Do not see what is contrary to propriety, do not listen to what is contrary to propriety, do not speak what is contrary to propriety, do not do what is contrary to propriety. Outside the main entrance, Xiao Xiao had finally come to a stop. Guanliang Han, who had been taking great strides, almost crashed into him. Jumping around agitatedly, he yelled angrily, "Damn it, what's going on with you? Give me the soldier tally." Bing Fu, aka Hu Fu, tiger tally. This was an object made of copper, jade, wood or stone in two halves, usually in the shape of a tiger, and used in ancient times to convey military orders or dispatch troops, and was therefore proof of authority. One half would remain with the monarch or authority, and the other was given to the military officer/commander. If verification were required, the two halves would match. In Xiao Xiao's hand was indeed the soldier tally of the Guan family troops. Guanliang Han reached out a hand to seize it, but Xiao Xiao avoided him. They sparred hand to hand for a brief moment, before Guanliang Han realized he could not do anything. He retracted his hand and said, "Third brother, are you thinking that all my troops belong to your family? Then what's the point of your 30,000 genie guards? It would not be good for the genie guards to be publicly involved," Xiao Xiao said. "Let me use your soldier tally once. After I'm done with it, I'll return it to you." "No way," Guanliang Han said resolutely. "I already took the fall for you in the reservoir matter. This time what illegal thing are you going to do? If His Majesty should want to assign blame, then it's going to be King bad luck for my life." Out of the blue he said, "However, since I am your senior brother, and I, this second brother, am highly generous, if you tell me what you are going to do, I will hand the soldier tally over to you. Otherwise, even if you take it, I will find a way to ensure that you are unable to gather them." Beiluhegua, lit. To shoulder/bear a black pot. "I'm borrowing your troops to pursue Lian," Xiao Xiao responded. "Lian?" Guanliang Han said. "You know where he is? Why on earth are you pursuing him?" Seeing Xiao Xiao remain silent, Guanliang Han seemingly came to a conclusion and said, "Is this a task His Majesty gave you?" Xiao Xiao kept the soldier tally, turned and walked away saying many thank. "Hey, I haven't finished yet." Guanliang Han hollered furiously. "This is such a big matter, I have to accompany you. Third brother, you wait right there for me." Their voices gradually faded away. That morning, Zhang Ruan woke up early, as did her 3 servant girls. After serving Zhang Ruan her meal, Lian Xiao started selecting Zhang Ruan's clothes. Bai Ji said, "Look for something more plain, since Miss is going to offer prayers today." After much searching, Lian Xiao finally selected a plain blue long jacket made of rain silk, 6 jacquard weave brocade with a pipa collar for Zhang Ruan. Over this, she wore a jade-colored silk shawl decorated with a pattern of scattered flowers among twisted vines. 7. They had grown accustomed to seeing her wear bright crimson clothes, so her wearing such plain silk ones, together with her indifferent expression when she did not smile, gave her a cold appearance. 6. USI jean, a type of brocade which is composed of white and other colors of warp threads, so the effect is to have colors interspersed with white bands, sometimes with shading. 7. Chanjihua, a very Chinese pattern of flowers among twisted vines, commonly seen on Chinese blue and white porcelain. As Lu Zhu combed Zhang Ruan's hair, she said, "Miss, there might be a lot of danger today. How about preparing 1 or 2 means of self-defense?" Zhang Ruan nodded, so after Lu Zhu had swept her hair up into a bun, she inserted a sharp pointed hairpin. The tip of the hairpin was so sharp and long, it could be considered a weapon. Right before they were about to leave, Bai Ji thought for a moment, then retrieved a dagger from the table drawer. The dagger's handle was inlaid with silver, in which was embedded several pearls. It was clearly a collector's item to be admired. Bai Ji saw that the blade was somewhat dull, but still placed it in Zhang Ruan's hand, saying, "Miss, take this as well. It's better than not having anything." Zhang Ruan weighed the dagger in her hand, then tucked the dagger into her sleeve. The 4 of them were leaving the Fu when they noticed a horse carriage stopped at one side. Jiang Dan, Jiang Li, and Jiang Susu were all crammed into one horse carriage, while Jiang Chao had a carriage of his own. Jiang Ruan also had her own. Jiang Ruan looked inquiringly at Xia Yan, who was standing beside her. Gently, Xia Yan said, "Ruaner is the Jiang Fu's eldest daughter, and your personal maidservants are many. I'm afraid that placing you in another carriage would not show you the proper consideration and attention, so mother has specially arranged another carriage for you." Zhang Ruan looked at the carriage which had been specially selected for her. The exterior was magnificent, on par with Jiang Susu's carriage, except that it was slightly smaller, just big enough to seat herself and a few maidservants. "That mother would do this makes Ruan Yang feel embarrassed," Zhang Ruan said as she smiled faintly. "We are all sisters of the Jiang Fu. How is it possible to favor one and discriminate against the others?" Xia Yan's smile deepened. "Ruana, why should you say such things? All of you sisters are good, but since you are the eldest sister, you should naturally present yourself as being more dignified and impressive. Moreover, it is not possible to look for another carriage right now. Why don't we go ahead with our journey and not delay any longer? Otherwise we will miss the opportunity to offer Tuzhu incense." Chapter 92. Chapter 92. Zhang Ruan smiled wordlessly. It was at this time that a voice from behind Xia Yan was heard saying, "Mother is overanxious." Jiang Xing strode over and patted Zhang Ruan's head. Since the young ladies are all sisters of the Jiang Fu, it would indeed not be a good idea to have Zhang Ruan occupy a carriage by herself. Father has also always been benevolent, and has never discriminated between the Shu and Di sons and daughters. When Xia Yan heard the phrase, "no discrimination between the Shu and Di sons and daughters," her face turned green. Even when Zhao Mei had been alive and in good health, Zhang Quan had treated Jiang Susu and Jiang Chao much better than Zhang Ruan and Jiang Xing. Even at present they were seen as being inferior. Thus, when Jiang Xing said this, her heart constricted. She looked over at Jiang Xing to see that his expression was proper and at ease, without even the slightest hint of sarcasm. Xia Yan cursed inwardly. Jiang Xing and Zhang Ruan had such unforgiving tongues that there was an unbearable urge to tear their mouths off. "But it's really difficult to find another carriage right now," Xia Yan said helplessly. Jiang Xing smiled fleetingly and said, "No matter." He waved his hand and several carriages came into sight, moving towards them. There were 3 carriages in total and all of them looked exactly the same as the carriage which had been specially selected for Zhang Ruan. Jiang Xing said, I have found some carriages, would my younger sisters kindly take their seats? Xia Yan was taken aback and felt a sudden chill. She stole a glance at Zhang Xing's face, but there was nothing strange about his expression. She forced a laugh and said, "How could I allow you, my son, to spend money this way?" Zhang Xing smiled and said, "Mother does not need to be like this. These coachmen are all excellent, and will drive both speedily and steadily. My younger sisters need not suffer from constant jolting, and will be able to speed there and back." Zhang Ruan also smiled and said, "Mother, you don't need to keep refusing. Or could it be that you don't wish to accept Dage's kind intentions?" Under the eyes of the watchful onlookers, Xia Yan was dumbstruck and rendered speechless by Zhang Ruan's words. She could not decline the offer, and thus could only grit her teeth and accept it. Jiang Susu, her face veiled so her expression was unseen, took the lead and walked to the rear carriage. Jiang Li naturally welcomed this development, as she no longer had to share a carriage with Jiang Susu and Jiang Dan. Jiang Dan bit her lip and glanced timidly at Zhang Xing before slowly disembarking. Zhang Ruan waited for her sisters to enter the carriages Zhang Xing had procured for them before boarding a carriage with Lu Zhu and the other servant girls. As Xia Yan struggled to maintain her gentle smile, she saw Zhang Xing wave his hand, and two imposing bodyguards came out of nowhere. Zhang Xing said, "Protect the young ladies well." The two bodyguards accepted their orders. Startled, Xia Yan said, "Xing, since our Wan and the other sisters are traveling by themselves to such a distant location, and second younger brother is not trained in martial arts, I was afraid that the Fu's bodyguards would be of little use." Zhang Xing smiled as he continued, "These two brothers of mine are rather rough fellows. They have seen blood spilled and are fairly bloodthirsty themselves. With them protecting our Wan and the others, I feel more at ease." When he said seen blood spilled and are fairly bloodthirsty, he deliberately slowed down his speech. He saw Xia Yan shiver, and she seemed somewhat reluctant to look at the expression on his face. As Zhang Chao sat in the carriage, he kept glaring at Zhang Xing, following his every word and movement. When he heard Zhang Xing saying that he, Zhang Chao, did not know martial arts, followed by his calling forth of the two bodyguards, he felt as if he had been most egregiously insulted. He glared at Zhang Xing even more fiercely and cursed him 100 times over in his heart. After Zhang Xing had issued his orders, Zhang Ruan's head emerged from behind the carriage curtains. She smiled at him and said, "Dage, do go home." Zhang Xing patted her on the head, his expression as warm as ever as he regarded her and said, "Be careful on the road." Zhang Ruan smiled as she let the curtain fall once again. When she could no longer see Zhang Xing, she leaned against the side of the carriage, sighed softly and said, in a low voice, "I'm sorry, Dage." A hint of jealousy flashed in Jiang Susu's eyes as she took in the interaction between this pair of siblings. Nowadays in the Jiangfu, Zhang Xing was just like a vengeful spirit, with a palpably murderous aura. No one dared to provoke him, fearing to incite the fury of this soldier who had returned from the battlefield. Jiang Susu loathed Zhang Xing, but was also envious that Zhang Ruan had such an outstanding older brother protecting her. It was not so long ago that Jiang Susu also had Zhang Chao protecting her. At that time he was at the high point of his career. People were lauding him as a potential Zhuangyuan top scorer in the imperial examinations, and Jiang Susu had naturally become extremely conceited. But now Zhang Chao was the laughingstock of the capital, while Zhang Xing had experienced a transformation, becoming a deputy general. The more protective he was of Zhang Ruan, the more envy stirred within Jiang Susu. She let the curtain fall heavily and thought about what Xia Yan had said to her the day before. Under her veil, she could not hold back a pleased smile. So what if Zhang Xing was outstanding? So what if he was protecting Zhang Ruan? Today, she would not be able to escape what was planned for her even if she had wings to fly. 10 Zhang Xing's would not be able to rescue her. Jiang Dan had been watching Xia Yan and Zhang Xing thoughtfully. Abruptly, she pulled the curtains closed. Behind the curtains, her timid expression vanished, and the corners of her mouth gradually lifted up. The carriages traveled along the drenched stone-flagged road, sending little sprays of water into the air as they went. Zhang Xing followed Zhang Ruan's departing carriage with his eyes, seemingly reluctant to move away. Xia Yan smiled as she asked Zhang Xing. Xing, don't you have military business to attend to today? The general is occupied with official business today, and doesn't require my presence, Zhang Xing replied. Xia Yan felt a stab of anxiety as she asked, then Xing, why don't you return to the Fu to wait? The weather today is excellent, so I think I'll stay at the Fu gate for a while longer. Zhang Xing smiled faintly and said, Mother, is there something wrong? That day the sky was gloomy and it was raining incessantly. Excellent weather? Xia Yan bit her lip and said through clenched teeth, nothing. Seeing as Zhang Xing appeared to have no intention to return to the Fu for the time being, she felt her anxiety mounting. Gritting her teeth, she turned and headed back inside to her courtyard. After Xia Yan had gone in, Zhang Xing's expression grew solemn. Waving his hand, he called over 2 more guards and ordered, watch the entrance to the Fu carefully. Whoever comes out, follow them closely, then knock them out. Both guards received their orders and left. Zhang Xing thought about what he had been told the previous night by Lu Zhu, whom Zhang Ruan had sent over. She had said to prepare 3 identical horse carriages, look for 2 bodyguards with outstanding martial arts skills to accompany them, and finally, to visit the Zhao family again. He had no idea what Zhang Ruan was planning. When Zhang Ruan wanted to conceal something, not even he, as her older brother, could persuade her to disclose it. Moreover, he would never force her to tell him what she did not want to talk about, as he trusted his own Mimi. However, today, for some unknown reason, his eyelids had been twitching uncontrollably, as if something bad was about to happen. He had to make a great effort to suppress his unease. Turning, he mounted his horse and sped off in the direction of the General Fu. When Xia Yan reached Yanhuayuan, Shaoxi informed her that Zhang Xing had left. Xia Yan immediately straightened up and hurriedly said, quick, send 2 people to tell them, Zhang Ruan is in the 2nd carriage. Don't make any mistakes. Shaoxi rushed off. Xia Yan finally sat down and released a long breath. Lin Lang served her a cup of tea, which she took a few sips of, feeling the panic within her subside. When she thought about all of Zhang Xing's movements today, she felt uneasy, and turned to Li Momo beside her to ask, Momo, in your opinion, have they discovered something? Otherwise, why would they suddenly change carriages? Li Momo consoled her by saying, Foreign, rest easy. This servant thinks that eldest young master is certainly incredibly crafty, and he is doing all this to guard against Foreign. However, he could not possibly have uncovered Foreign's plan, otherwise he would not have allowed eldest miss to go with the others to Baoguang Temple, and with only 2 bodyguards accompanying her. Xia Yan felt calmer on hearing Li Momo's words. She said, that is what I think as well. Humph. He's definitely crafty, but today, that little slut cannot escape her downfall. So what if there are bodyguards? There are only 2 of them, after all, no different from a cicada trying to stop a runaway carriage. On thinking about it, one could say that Zhang Ruan brought this upon herself by engendering such a deep animosity between herself and the Li family. Lian is a person who haggles over every cent, so how could he let her off so easily? A chilly faint smile appeared on her beautiful face. Baoguang Temple is a great distance away. Even if Zhang Xing receives news and hastens there, he will not make it in time. The previous day, she had received a letter from Lian out of the blue. In the letter, Lian had gone straight to the point and declared he wanted to eliminate Zhang Ruan, and needed her help to do so. Even though Xia Yan was hesitant to associate with a criminal official like Lian, he was a master at manipulating people. With just a few words, he had stirred up Xia Yan to the point where she could barely wait to tear Zhang Ruan to shreds. Zui Chun, criminal official/minister. There were apparently 8 major criminal ministers in Chinese history. Qingfu Zhaogao, Lai Junshun, Li Linfu, Qin Hui, Yen Song, Wei Zhongxian, He Shun. See here for more details. Xia Yan had originally planned to take action on the journey to Baoguang Temple, and cause Zhang Ruan to suffer. However, when Lian unveiled his plan to Xia Yan in the letter, she found it too marvelous for words. Thus, she conceded this opportunity to Lian. Even though the young ladies of Jiangfu would proceed to Baoguang Temple as she had planned, what would take place would not be her original plan. If the plan succeeded, of course, that would be great. She would be the third party who benefited in the clash between the two of them. If the plan failed, it would have nothing to do with her. Li An's plan was bold and crazy, but even if something happened, the sudden appearance of a criminal official would have no connection with her. The original arrangement was foolproof. Who knew that Jiang Xing would appear all of a sudden and disturb their arrangements? Furthermore, with 4 identical carriages, Li An's people would inevitably make a mistake. If they made a mistake, she could not help shuddering, then immediately comforted herself. It would not happen. The messengers would inform them of the change swiftly. There was no way Zhang Ruan would escape the calamity that awaited her on the road to Baoguang Temple. On previous occasions, she had managed to narrowly escape numerous disasters due to sheer luck, but what awaited Zhang Ruan now was an inescapable trap that even 2 bodyguards skilled in martial arts would not be able to help her out of. This was because Li An's people did not consist of just 1 or 2 persons, but a troop of soldiers. Genuine elite troops. Secretly kept by the Grand Counselor Fu. Chapter 91. 1. Chapter 91. 1. As the horse carriages journeyed along the mountain road, it was inevitable that it would be troublesome. Fortunately, the coachmen that Jiang Xing had found were very skillful. They navigated the extremely muddy road such that the journey was steady and stable, and those sitting in the carriage felt not the slightest bit indisposed. Shui Cliff was rugged and precipitous, looking like a sword which had been snapped in half, a sheer precipice which struck fear into people's hearts. The mountain was densely covered in forest, and the night owls which nested in the trees were occasionally startled by the sound of horse carriages passing through. They would launch themselves into the air, leaving only black shadows behind. The road to Shui Cliff wound through high mountains and deep valleys, lush with verdant foliage and sporting craggy rocks in strange shapes. It possessed a unique kind of danger, and those from rich families liked to stop there for a time, to enjoy the rare and beautiful scenery. However, ever since it had started to rain continuously in the capital, the road had become unbearably muddy. With the sun refusing to make its appearance and dark, gloomy clouds continually looming overhead, the formerly beautiful scenery had taken on an eerie cast. The 5 horse carriages moved forward in silence. The foremost carriage was Zhang Chao's. His was the only carriage that looked different from the others, being not quite as refined. However, it was still presentable. Immediately following his carriage in sequence were those of Zhang Ruan, Zhang Susu, Zhang Li, and Zhang Dan. The coachman did not speak, and neither did the inhabitants of the carriages. As a result, the only sounds were those of the horsewhip landing on the bodies of the horses and the turning of the carriage wheels. Carriage will probably look something like this. Zhang Ruan leaned against the soft cushions of the carriage as Lu Zhu steeped tea for her. The carriage Xia Yan had prepared was indeed exquisite, and there was even a small table inside. Zhang Ruan had been very busy that morning and consequently had eaten little, so Lian Xiao and Bai Ji had brought a few snacks along. Lu Zhu had skillfully preserved some of the plum blossoms that had been plucked 2 days ago, and was currently steeping plum blossom tea for Zhang Ruan in the carriage. The sweet aroma issued forth from her carriage and wafted through the air, reaching the noses of the people in the carriages at the rear. Zhang Li snorted in disdain and said, "Of course she would enjoy herself." She looked around and grew angry at the fact that the maidservants beside her were not only not as quick-witted as Zhang Ruan's, but were also not as close to her as Zhang Ruan's were to her. Not a single snack had been prepared. However, Zhang Susu had something else on her mind. When she saw that Zhang Ruan was even in the mood to drink tea and nibble on snacks, her face under the veil tensed, and she said quietly, "Go and die." Zhang Dan simply leaned against the carriage window in a light doze, seemingly unaffected by everything. The road to Shui Cliff stretching ahead of them could be said to be manageable. Then they eventually reached the most dangerous stretch of road. The road here was narrow with valleys on both sides. Sandwiched in the middle was the narrow trail, like the mouth of a calabash. Hence, this stretch of road had been named Calabash Mouth, and the valleys on either side were dense jungle. When the lead carriage reached the start of Calabash Mouth, a slight rustling was suddenly heard among the trees. The carriages stopped abruptly. Lian Xiao and Bai Ji paused in their movements, displaying some agitation, while Lu Zhu's forehead was beaded with perspiration. Meanwhile, Zhang Ruan was slowly sipping her tea. Her posture was extremely elegant. The horses sensed danger, and no matter how fervently the coachmen cracked their whips, the horses refused to move even one step forward. The Jiangfu guards had all drawn their swords, but the two bodyguards that Jiang Xinji had ordered to follow them stood in front of Zhang Ruan's horse carriage, not moving an inch, their faces already tinged with bloodthirst. Jiang Li was the first to cry out sharply, "What's going on?" As if her cry had opened a vent, there was a huge rumbling sound, making it seem as if the earth itself was shaking. From the valleys on both sides of Calabash Mouth, a large mass of black-clad, sinister people suddenly appeared, and the coachman jumped in shock. These people were wearing plain cotton clothing like mountain bandits, and they all charged together towards the horse carriages. "Retreat! Quick retreat!" The Jiangfu guard shielded the carriages, intending to evacuate the occupants. However, that swarm of mountain bandits moved unexpectedly swiftly, and they reached the carriages in the twinkling of an eye. Apart from Jiang Xinji's two bodyguards, the Jiangfu guards numbered 20. These 20 guards had no choice but to engage the mountain bandits in combat, and for some time the only sound that could be heard was the pong, pong, pong clash of swords. The swish of the blades was chilling, and from time to time a spray of fresh blood would blossom on the curtains of the exquisite carriages. How could there be mountain bandits? How could there be mountain bandits? Jiang Li screamed. However, once she lifted the window curtain and saw the frightful scene outside, she immediately fainted. Jiang Dan squeezed herself tightly into a corner of the carriage with her two maidservants resolutely protecting her. The three of them bit their lips and did not dare make a sound. There were only 3 carriages where all was calm. Jiang Chao's carriage was right in front, but the murderous mountain bandits bypassed his carriage. At one glance, it was obvious that the area around Jiang Chao's carriage was clear, save for the Jiangfu's guards who had gone to his rescue. It was very peculiar. Jiang Su sat in her carriage, a frosty little smile on her lips. The fiercer the close combat fighting outside, the more elated her smile. She could barely hold herself back from going over to Zhang Ruan's carriage and tearing open the curtain to see Zhang Ruan losing her head out of fear. Zhang Ruan was still sipping tea. The 2 bodyguards outside her carriage were more useful than 10 of the Jiangfu guards. Indeed, there had not been even a splash of blood on the carriage curtains. The Jiangfu guards were heavily outnumbered, for there were at least 100 men attacking them. The more they fought in close combat, the more fearful they became. Mountain bandits? No, even though they tried to conceal it, it was abundantly clear that these bandits were highly skilled in martial arts. What's more, which mountain bandit would just charge and kill people without first asking for the victim's money and valuables? However, even though they had their doubts, these Jiangfu guards were still at a disadvantage. It seemed that their opponents did not intend to kill the occupants of the carriages, but aimed to eliminate all the bodyguards. Just as the number of Jiangfu guards was dwindling, Zhang Ruan put down her teacup and said, "Lu Zhu." Lu Zhu paused momentarily before flinging open the window curtains and yelling, "Help!" When the 2 bodyguards guarding Zhang Ruan's carriage heard this, they both sprang into action simultaneously. With rapid movements, before the bandits in the vicinity could react, they had already jumped to the front of the carriages at the rear of Zhang Ruan's. Using their swords, they jabbed firmly at the horses' hindquarters while turning the horses' heads. The second the horses felt the painful jabs, they reared, then shot forward like arrows, heading into the distance. Thus, the 2 bodyguards set Zhang Ruan's carriage in motion. As a result, the 4 identical horse carriages began barreling headlong in different directions. Someone concealed deep within the jungle immediately stood up and raised his bow and arrow, but he was stopped by another person. "Hold it!" The gray-clad figure slowly stood up, his gaze sharp with a coldness that cut into one's bones. Thinking of escaping? No better than a trapped animal struggling. The 4 carriages hurtled along. The coachmen had all been thrown off, but the young ladies were still within the carriages. Jiang Su had no idea what had happened outside. She only knew that the carriage had suddenly started to move crazily. She was tossed in all directions within the carriage and hollered in panic, "Help! Someone quick, help!" Only the wind answered her. 4 identical carriages, scattered in opposite directions. The four of them were disheveled and unkempt, having rolled on the ground, and they looked battered and exhausted. Meanwhile, the two bodyguards sent by Jiang Xing hurried up to them. On seeing the snapped rope of the carriage, and how close to Shui Cliff the young ladies were, they both heaved a deep sigh of relief, and looked at Zhang Ruan with no small measure of admiration. It was rare indeed that someone could keep as calm as she had done in such an alarming situation, possess such clear judgment, and move so decisively in severing the rope, thus saving her own life. What's more, to look as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred even after narrowly escaping with her life. Never before had they met a young lady from any family with such guts, but on giving it a second thought, with an awe-inspiring older brother who fought with no care for life or death, the younger sister could not be that different. On hearing the sound of footsteps closing in on them, the expression on the two men's faces darkened, and they turned to shield Zhang Ruan. The soldiers dressed as mountain bandits had split into 4 groups, and the group pursuing Zhang Ruan consisted of more than 100 soldiers. All these devils stared fiercely at Zhang Ruan. Before her were these hungry wolves, behind her was Shui Cliff. They were simply waiting to slaughter the lamb, for there was no way to retreat. Zhang Ruan quietly surveyed the situation. Out of the blue from in front of her came the pa-pa-pa sound of someone clapping, and a familiar voice reached her ears. "Eldest Zhang Miss, you are truly elegant. Even in this dangerous situation, you can still remain unperturbed." The soldiers automatically parted to make way for a gray-clad figure to walk to the front. He advanced one slow step at a time, as if deliberately making something clear. Zhang Ruan smiled faintly. "Second young Master Li is indeed highly magnanimous. Having become a stray dog, you still dare to grace us with your presence in broad daylight." These words jabbed painfully at Lian. His expression changed for a moment as he glared at Zhang Ruan with shadowed and ruthless eyes. Suddenly, as if he had recalled something, he smiled and said, "If I were eldest Zhang Miss, I would certainly not run my mouth at the present time, so as to avoid more pain in future." Before Zhang Ruan could say anything, Lian Xiao was already cursing him with her arms akimbo. "A criminal at large who still dares to parade everywhere and show off. My young miss is proper and upright, but you are uncaring of the law and morality. You watch out, your head will be cut off tomorrow, and you'll be hanging at the city gate for everyone to see for the next 3 days." As she stood in front of Zhang Ruan, the soldier nearest her immediately hit her in the chest. Lian Xiao flew into the air before dropping heavily to the ground, spitting out a mouthful of fresh blood. "Lian Xiao!" Bai Ji cried out in fear. Lu Zhu held on to Zhang Ruan even more tightly. Zhang Ruan looked at Lian Xiao, who seemed close to dying, and fury flashed in her eyes. She turned to face Lian once again and asked very serenely, "What noble errand brings you here, second young Master Li? Surely you didn't come here just to bully a maidservant." Lian laughed. "Say what you like, but in the end she was injured in your place. Eldest Zhang Miss is so concerned about a mere maidservant, but can't understand how pained I am by the injury you inflicted upon my elder brother." Zhang Ruan snorted disdainfully to herself as Lian continued, "Previously, I was no match for eldest Zhang Miss' superlative methods, but I never imagined that eldest Zhang Miss would take action in such a ruthless manner, leaving me no choice but to deal with you as my enemy at present. Eldest Zhang Miss, don't blame me for it." As he spoke, his tone became more amiable, but the interest in his eyes deepened, like a wild beast who had found a prey of great interest. His eyes burned with a brilliant light. Chapter 91. 2. Chapter 91. 2. Second young Master Li wishes to capture me? Zhang Ruan asked. "You are not fearful of adding on to your guilt and crimes?" Lian burst into uproarious laughter. "It's only that eldest Zhang Miss' luck was bad. On her way to burn Tuzhu incense she was not careful, was captured by mountain bandits, and lost her innocence. She was unable to gain the blessings conferred by burning Tuzhu incense. What has any of that to do with someone named Li?" The two bodyguards immediately glared at Lian with fury in their eyes. If this kind of talk were to be associated with an unmarried, cloistered young lady, her entire life would be ruined. However, both men knew very well that with such a large number of soldiers present, the situation would clearly not be as simple as seizing Zhang Ruan. It was the thought of the treatment Zhang Ruan would suffer after her capture that caused the two men to break into cold sweat. Mountain bandits? Zhang Ruan smiled slightly. Aren't they soldiers? Lian paused, then narrowed his eyes and said, Eldest Zhang Miss is exceptionally intelligent. What a pity that the outcome of this battle has already been decided. You have no other way out, so just come with me. Zhang Ruan shook her head. The outcome has not yet been decided. Stop fighting for nothing, Lian warned her. Unexpectedly, Zhang Ruan laughed lightly, and her face suddenly lit up in a joyous smile, as beautiful as a flower which even reached her eyes. However, that smile was just as suddenly dropped, and her expression mirrored that of a still, frozen pool of water. Really? She enunciated clearly, Chile. June. Lian's eyes widened and he unconsciously took 2 steps back. You. His mind and emotions were experiencing a turbulent storm. She actually knew. Chile June was the army that the Grand Counselor Fu kept externally. Even Xianli did not know about this private army. Ordinarily, the soldiers would disguise themselves as peasants. They were the Grand Counselor Fu's trump card, to be used as a last resort, and they only obeyed his orders. How could Zhang Ruan know this secret that even Li Dong and Li Yang had no inkling of? Zhang Ruan smiled faintly. Second young master Li is fearful? What are you afraid of? Are you afraid because your meticulously kept secret has been uncovered? The Chile soldiers were all stirring restlessly, watching Lian's facial expression, knowing that what Zhang Ruan had just said to Lian represented an immense threat. Thus, without even being aware of it, their weapons were all directed at her. A secret that has been kept for too long is no longer a secret, Zhang Ruan said softly, with indifference in her voice, such that Lian felt as if she was calling his attention to something. He suppressed the panic in his heart and sneered at her. You're babbling nonsense. Didn't second young Master Li act in this way today in order to redress the injustice done to the Grand Counselor Fu? Zhang Ruan's hair was disordered, and her clothes were soiled due to her having rolled on the muddy ground. Yet, as she stood there, she exuded an unmistakable grace, with something unexpectedly akin to austere beauty. She said, what a pity that from the time that you made the decision to act this way, the Grand Counselor Fu never had a chance at recovery. You've lost. Lian's heart jumped in agitation, and his unease abruptly snowballed. He wanted to command his subordinates to seize Zhang Ruan immediately in order to stop her from talking, but she swiftly said, privately training troops intending to rebel, plotting a rebellion, all clearly criminal charges. Oh, doesn't this sound serious? She continued, your actions today have truly confirmed the hopeless situation of the Grand Counselor Fu. Lian stood there as if struck by a lightning bolt. Oh. Slowly, he raised his head and asked, as if in a fevered dream, those rumors, it was you who started them. Zhang Ruan offered him a slight smile in response. The Grand Counselor Fu had reigned supreme in the Great Jin dynasty for so many years. How could it utterly collapse due to a single lapse in responsibility regarding the reservoir? If the emperor really did execute the Grand Counselor's family for this, it would undoubtedly strike fear into the hearts of the court officials, and the structure of the imperial court would naturally experience upheaval. A monarch's worst fear is volatile public sentiment. The many factions in the imperial court all serve to check and balance one another's influence. If the equilibrium is to be shifted, then it must be done gradually, one step at a time. It cannot be upset all at once. Unfortunately, at this time, Lian's inclination was to cause chaos, and he had lost his former cool-headed analysis of situations. Zhang Ruan had allowed Zhang Xing to help to spread some rumors, which had eventually reached Lian's ears. As a result, Lian was restless. Truth and falsehood, falsehood and truth. Once a highly intelligent man has lost his ability to reason, his high degree of confusion will cause him to err and offend to an extent that an ordinary person could never achieve. He had allowed his hidden Chile soldiers to reveal themselves, disguised as mountain bandits. They were the only card he had left, and he had considered it a foolproof plan. However, in one breath, Zhang Ruan had revealed his secret. In a moment of understanding, he realized the offense with the reservoir would not condemn them, but raising a private army intending to rebel, there was no way out for the Grand Counselor Fu. The Grand Counselor Fu had not been facing a criminal charge, but she had forced his hand in order to saddle them with a major criminal charge of immoral and treasonous behavior. She had really gone so far as to eliminate everyone in the Grand Counselor Fu in one fell swoop, with no way to redeem themselves. Such a poisonous mind, such ruthless methods. Lian retreated a few steps, his face as pale as paper. All his life, he had been his own master, but he had now fallen into the hands of this cloistered young girl. How could he yield willingly? Zhang Ruan suddenly seemed to remember something. She laughed and said, Luo Shu Men, Yen Luo Jiao, Qilei Temple, Jiyun Shi, presumably all the Qilei soldiers there have already been subdued and brought under control. Li An's face, which had slowly regained its color, once again turned green. All the locations Zhang Ruan had mentioned were the hiding places of the Qilei soldiers. These locations were secret. Apart from the soldiers themselves and him, no one else ought to know about them. How could she know? Her words, what other meaning did they have? Zhang Ruan explained, by His Majesty's order, the Zhao family troops and the Guan family troops are assisting His Majesty to apprehend rebellious ministers. She looked behind Lian and said, naturally, the elite troops of the Qilei army are all right here. Ruan Yang is extremely honored that you would utilize your elite troops without hesitation to capture me. Lian stared at her fixedly, and the look in his eyes was completely different from that earlier. A kind of crazed despair showed itself upon his face, and Zhang Ruan gently placed the last straw upon this beaten camel's back by saying, Second young Master Li, you've lost. Strong emotion arose in Lian's throat, and he spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. He yelled at the surrounding soldiers, I have not lost, seize this demoness. Kill her. The two bodyguards at Zhang Ruan's side immediately flashed their swords, and there seemed to be an answering flash of light in the sky, at a distance. While the two bodyguards were momentarily arrested, Zhang Ruan whispered to one of them abruptly, Don't mind me, split open Lian's clothes, use force to do it. Although the bodyguard could not comprehend why, he surveyed both Lian and Zhang Ruan, and saw that Zhang Ruan was not in the least fearful of Lian. On the other hand, Lian's face was pale. Being firmly convinced of her decision without second thought, he raised his sword and slashed it through the air towards Lian's clothes. The Qilei soldiers had initially thought this bodyguard wanted to protect Zhang Ruan, but they never imagined that he would go straight for Lian. They hurriedly rushed forward to block him, but they did not expect that the bodyguard's target was not Lian himself. The sword qi permeated through the air and sliced open Lian's outer robe. Lian unconsciously took a step back, but this bodyguard, who was outstanding among his peers, executed a different maneuver, whereupon the sword qi completely sliced through the front of Lian's robe. No one could have foreseen this. The Qilei soldiers were stupefied into silence, and had no idea if they should search for clothes to cover Lian, or turn around and handle Zhang Ruan. However, with this scene involving Lian clearly set out for all to see, a sharp inhalation of breath could be heard amongst the crowd. Lian was stunned for a moment, then immediately regained his senses. With one move he covered his lower region, his heart so full of shame that he felt like dying. So he's a eunuch, the bodyguard muttered. Suddenly realizing that Zhang Ruan was nearby, he quickly shut his mouth. Tianyan. Lit. Born eunuch, refers to a man whose sex organ is underdeveloped, and is likely infertile. Lian was exceedingly fearful. Of the two secrets he had harbored his entire life, the first one had been spoken aloud by Zhang Ruan, and the second had been revealed before the eyes of the general public. These two had been his vulnerable points. Although he was covering himself just now, everyone had seen clearly that organ in Lian's lower region was nothing but a round lump. To look at it was nauseating. Lian was both frightened and angry. When Zhang Ruan had spoken of the Qilei army a moment ago, his blood had been boiling because of his indignation and despair. But now that his deepest, darkest secret had been laid bare in front of everyone, he completely panicked. Not just panicked but felt terrified. He could not understand why that bodyguard beside Zhang Ruan had suddenly sliced open his clothes. Only Li Dong and Xian Li knew about his condition, thus it was not possible that anyone else would know. Very slowly, he turned his gaze upon Zhang Ruan. Jiang Ruan was smiling faintly at him. In her previous life, she had heard Xianli say that Lian had been born with a disease, an unmentionable illness. It was because Xianli knew Lian's secret that Lian had been loyal to him. If not, after all, in the Grand Counselor Fu, why had Li Yong been Li Dong's favorite despite his proclivity to dally with prostitutes? Lian was highly intelligent, yet Li Dong had never had a close relationship with him, only treating him with an abundance of courtesy. If not, when Li Yong had been castrated, why had Li Dong been so furious? Because Lian was a born eunuch, and because Li Yong had been rendered useless, the Grand Counselor Fu had no successor. Jiang Ruan said softly, "Second young Master Li. When a secret has been kept for too long, it is no longer a secret." Lian felt as if all the blood in his body was rushing to his head, and his entire body seemed to be frozen. Out of the blue, he lifted his head and uttered a heartbreaking wail that was so mournful that many of those present could not bear to hear it. He looked up, his eyes full of crazed bloodlust, and shouted, "Demoness, I'm going to kill you." On hearing his words, the Qi Lei soldiers behind him charged towards Jiang Ruan. Since he had already issued a kill order, they would obey. The two bodyguards beside Jiang Ruan made a supreme effort to stop the soldiers. Jiang Ruan's eyes turned severe. They could hear the pounding of horses' hooves in the distance echoing in the valleys. At the front was a tall man riding a big horse, behind him, a majestic army, not smaller in number than the Qi Lei soldiers. All of a sudden, Jiang Ruan yelled, "Lian, your Grand Counselor Fu has raised a private army and intends to revolt. Now, you are killing people in order to keep your secret safe, harming my family aligned with the imperial court." Her voice rang out clearly and resounded through the valley. "Even if I have to die, I won't die in your hands." Having said this without warning, she turned and leaped off Shui Cliff. "Miss!" Baiji cried out in alarm on the verge of fainting. Lu Zhu's eyes grew large. Then the swish of arrows broke through the air and a large number of soldiers and horses charged pell-mell into the midst of the Qi Lei soldiers and engaged them in combat. However, the leading horseman headed straight for the cliff edge. Zhao Yuanfeng swiftly dismounted and grabbed one of the bodyguards by the collar, yelling, "Where is the young lady?" The bodyguard shook his head and said, angrily, "She's jumped off the cliff." Behind him, Zhao Yi's entire body went rigid. Guanliang Han frowned and said, "What? How is that possible?" Jiang Ruan's mind was so crafty. How could she jump off the cliff just like that? Lian had been standing rooted to the spot, uncaring of the soldiers who had seized hold of him. He broke out into uncontrollable laughter and said, "Retribution! Retribution! That demoness deserved to die long ago. Retribution!" Guanliang Han kicked him and said, "Shut your mouth." He looked towards Xiao Xiao, who was coming up behind them, and asked, "What do we do?" Xiao Xiao was clad entirely in black brocade, and his features were exceptionally cold. He looked at the edge of the precipice, unfathomable emotion in his eyes. Just as he turned his head, Baiji pulled at his sleeve and sobbed out, "Save my young miss. I beg of you, save my young miss." Without letting go of his sleeve, she dropped to her knees and kowtowed repeatedly, until her entire forehead was bloody. Zhao Yi wanted to stop her, but Xiao Xiao pulled his sleeve free. As Baiji had been gripping it tightly, the force caused a brilliantly gleaming item to fall out of his sleeve. It was a bright jade Dai Lianhua pendant, with the butterfly resting on a magnolia flower. The workmanship was so exquisite that the butterfly was vivid and lifelike, and the pendant was inlaid with a first-rate emerald green opal. At one glance one could tell that this was a valuable item. Dai Lianhua, lit, equals butterfly, equals love romantic, equals flower. This is the title of a Tang Dynasty song/poem. Original title, Keitaji, magpie treading on a branch. It seems to have inspired a design of jewelry, featuring a butterfly resting on a flower. To the Chinese, the butterfly is a symbol of young love, as the butterfly flits from flower to flower in search of love. Together with a magnolia flower, which symbolizes female beauty, the pendant may thus be seen as symbolizing a young man's quest for love. After it fell out, the item rolled right in front of Baiji. Baiji looked at it, startled, and asked, "Why do you have my young miss pendant?" Chapter 92. 1. Chapter 92. 1. The jade Dai Lianhua pendant earring was on the ground. Baiji was about to pick it up, but Xiao Xiao grasped it first. Baiji's fingers trembled slightly and her voice was fraught with suspicion when she asked, "Why do you have my young miss earring?" Xiao Xiao seemed to be slightly startled. "Jiang Ruan." "This is my young miss," Baiji said. "It's been lost for many years. How did you come by it?" Xiao Xiao turned to glance at Yifeng, who was looking stiffly back at him. Zhao Yuanfeng and the others were also looking at him in bafflement. Xiao Xiao walked to the edge of the cliff and, contrary to everyone's expectations, lifted the corner of his robe and leaped forward in a sweeping motion. He moved so quickly that no one could stop him in time. Yifeng only had time to shout, "Master!" The mist and clouds swirled around Shui Cliff. One could only catch glimpses of mountain streams and thick forest in this quiet and secluded place. Yet, it also seemed to harbor boundless danger. Yifeng rushed to the cliff edge, a look of self-recrimination on his face. After a momentary shock, Guanliang Han gradually calmed down and walked over to pat Yifeng's shoulder. He said, "Xiao Xiao's qinggong is exceptional. If he didn't fully believe that he would succeed, he would not have attempted it. Why don't you return first? Zhao Darren and I will work together to send soldiers down there to search for them." A Chinese martial art which tends to be exaggerated in Wuxia stories e.g. people being able to move swiftly at superhuman speeds and perform gravity-defying acts such as skimming over tree tops. More here. Although he was also shocked and baffled as to why Xiao Xiao had unexpectedly jumped off the cliff edge, he knew that his fellow disciple had never been a headstrong person. Therefore, something must have happened for him to act this way. Yifeng listened to Guanliang Han, and knowing the extent of Xiao Xiao's martial arts skill, believed that nothing was likely to befall Xiao Xiao. Thus, he regained his composure and walked back to Guanliang Han's side. While walking past Baiji, he could not help but give her a complicated look. When Baiji heard Guanliang Han speak of a search, she heaved a sigh of relief, and hurried to check on Lian Qiao, who looked half dead as she lay on the ground. Her suspicions plagued her. Jinying Wang and Jiang Ruan were not connected in any way, so why was he carrying this? That jade Dai Lianhua pendant earring had been from a pair of Zhao Mei's favorite earrings. She had brought them with her from the General Fu when she got married, and she had always loved them. The workmanship was beautiful, and the raw materials were hard to come by. When Jiang Ruan grew older, Zhao Mei had given the earrings to her, and Jiang Ruan had worn them at all times. Later, on some unknown occasion when Jiang Ruan had gone out, she had returned with only one. Naturally, she could not wear only one earring, so she had put the other one away. Because it had belonged to Zhao Mei, Jiang Ruan locked it into a small box, which she wiped clean regularly. At present, that one was still locked inside the box, but the other earring was on Xiao Xiao's person. Why? Baiji just could not make sense of it. Two others who could not make sense of it were Zhao Yuanfeng and Zhao Yi. In their eyes, Xiao Xiao had jumped off the cliff because of Jiang Ruan. However, as people who were familiar with Xiao Xiao's character, they were sure that he was not someone who had tender feelings for the fairer sex. It seemed that there was a close relationship between Xiao Xiao and Jiang Ruan, but the expression on the face of Jiang Ruan's maidservant cast a lot of doubt on that assumption. However, suspicions notwithstanding, they still had to search for those two. Zhao Yuanfeng waved his hand and said, "I will bring Lian and the captives from the Qilei army back to the capital city. You stay with Guanliang Han, and locate Jiang Ruan's whereabouts." After some thought, he added with heavy emphasis, "You must find her." Although the Zhao family had only known Jiang Ruan for a short period of time, the Zhao family truly regarded her as a young lady from the General Fu. As her uncle, he was already experiencing much distress about the current situation, and if Jiang Xianji were to find out, Zhao Yuanfeng shook his head and sighed inwardly, apprehensive that there would once again be chaos. Deep in the mountain forests, the steep cliffs towered over the rest of the terrain. In the middle of the mountains, the snow had not yet melted, and the snow and ice was piled half a foot high. With every step, one's foot sank into the snow, and the cold attacked one's bones like stabbing needles. The rain fell incessantly, and the icy wind grew colder as did one's body. Zhang Ruan walked with an uneven gait on the valley floor of the steep cliff. The mud and snow had rendered her clothes exceedingly dirty, and she cut an extremely sorry figure. She paid no heed to her eerie surroundings and simply kept walking, only stopping when she saw a small cave appear in the distance. She pulled her clothes tightly around her as she searched for the entrance to the cave and finally entered it. The cave was not big, and there were dense bushes at the entrance, which were barely able to block the icy wind. As the sky gradually darkened, Zhang Ruan sat down in the depths of the cave entrance leaning against the wall and let out a sigh of relief. Then she pulled up her sleeve to expose the wound on her shoulder. Her plain clothes were completely sodden and clung tightly to her arms, and there was the faint reek of blood. As she pulled on the cloth, the slight sound of flesh and skin tearing was heard, and the cloth slowly came apart to reveal the wound beneath it, stuck to it with blood. It was a deep cut, such that the raw flesh within was protruding from the cut. She must have sustained the laceration from the sharp branches she had encountered as she fell. She had been carrying some medicine with her, but she had no idea where it was now. She had probably lost it during the fall. Zhang Ruan exposed the wound to the frigid air, and gazed at the cave mouth lost in thought. The topography of Shui Cliff's calabash mouth made it a strategic location. It was highly romantic to view the clouds from the cliff, especially early on a spring morning, when the clouds and mist had not yet dispersed. As daylight advanced, standing on the cliff watching the rosy light of sunrise spread across the heavens, with the sound of the wind in one's ears, the rain evaporating into a fine mist, the flowers and plants perfuming the air. It was truly paradise on earth. In her previous life, Xianli had once brought her here to watch the sunrise. At the moment of her astonishment at the beauty of the scene, Xianli had held her by the waist and jumped down with her. She had initially cried out in alarm, but laughed on hearing Xianli's bright voice. So it is that there are people in this wide world whose knowledge was far-reaching, who knew such a landscape presented itself below Shui Cliff. What was concealed by the clouds and mist was not a haphazard array of craggy rubble, but a smooth and gentle slope. If one were to step off the cliff suddenly into thin air, one would only drop a short way to this stone platform. She had always cherished every minute, every second of the time she had spent with Xianli. This was especially so after she had entered the palace, and she would reminisce about the beautiful scenery from time to time. She knew the terrain and layout of Shui Cliff better than anyone. Thus she had unhesitatingly leaped off the cliff, dropped through the clouds and landed on the stone platform. Then she had followed the route in her memory and climbed downwards. The soldiers would descend the cliff from another location, and would not see this stone platform. They would simply search for her and call out her name at the base of the cliff. She had ripped off pieces from her skirt and tied them to the branches along her way as markers. When the men sent by the Zhao family saw them, they would be able to find her. Somewhat weary, she closed her eyes. Raising a private army, intending to mount a rebellion. All these criminal charges were sufficient to ensure that the Grand Counselor Fu would never be forgiven. Moreover, all the actions that she had taken were really rather suspicious, so she had no choice but to pretend that Lian had forced her to jump off the cliff. In this way, another criminal charge would be added to Lian's record, that of conspiring to murder a member of a court official's family. As for her, she could cleanly extricate herself from the affair and brush aside all suspicion. She had worked out everything, but her calculations had not reckoned that her body would give up on her at this present time, leaving her no option but to seek a hiding place that was sheltered from the wind. From a young age, she had been frail and frequently ill, and having to suffer Zhonglan and his family's mistreatment for the past few years in the rural residence had caused this condition to become chronic. Later on, falling into the water because of Chun Zhao on that one occasion had been like adding hail to snow. In this life, she had returned to the Fu earlier, and Lian Xiao and Bai Ji were constantly watching over her. Thus, her physical condition seemed to be much better than before. Who could have known that today would bring this kind of turmoil, especially in such a cold, wind-swept place? She had already felt that her body was extremely weak, and if she had to wait for the soldiers to rescue her, she was afraid that she would lose consciousness before they could reach her, and be carried off by some wild beast. Even though she had found this mountain cave and was able to shelter from the wind and cold to some extent, she could still feel her body freezing bit by bit. Furthermore, the clothes plastered to her body were all thoroughly soaked by the snow and rain, and she had nothing with which she could warm herself. If she really had to wear these icy sodden clothes for an entire night, she honestly did not know what would become of her. Zhang Ruan rubbed her forehead and was contemplating going outside to gather some rocks in order to block up the entrance of the cave more tightly, when she heard light footsteps. Her expression changed and she sat bolt upright, listening attentively to the movement outside. The footsteps were light and unhurried, measured and steady. Yet, there was no shouting, no other noise. It could not be a soldier looking for her. Zhang Ruan's heart sank. It was getting late, and ordinary prey would not come to this place. Who could it be? The footsteps were heading straight for the mountain cave. Zhang Ruan reached into her sleeve. The dagger she had concealed before she left Jiangfu was still there. She clutched the cold dagger tightly and stared at the mouth of the cave hidden by the bushes. Step by step, striking her heart step by step. The footsteps stopped just a few paces shy of the cave mouth, and Zhang Ruan heaved a sigh of relief. The next second, the bushes had been knocked aside by something, and a slender figure appeared. The sky was gloomy, and it was already evening. In the hazy light, his face was clearly imprinted on Zhang Ruan's pupils. In that split second, both of them looked at each other. One was astounded, the other was slightly startled. Zhang Ruan stared at him fixedly. Xiao Xiao was clad in black brocade and his tall figure was slim and elegant. His already outstanding appearance was enhanced by his naturally gracious disposition, which also manifested itself in his bearing. Thus he brightened the dark and dirty mountain cave by his mere presence. Xiao Xiao was also taking measure of the person facing him, a young lady whose clothes were clinging to her body, with unkempt crow-black hair, and a pair of eyes which were staring at him with equal parts alertness and surprise. She had always been gentle and calm, smilingly manipulating people, so this was the very first time he had ever seen her cutting such a sorry figure. With these thoughts turning in his head, he strode into the cave. Xiao Wangye. After quite a while, Zhang Ruan came to her senses. Looking at him, she asked, "Why are you here? It's already late. The path out of here is difficult, and your body is extremely weak. You shouldn't move around too much. It's best that we stay here and wait for the soldiers," Xiao Xiao said calmly. Zhang Ruan heard the meaning behind his words and laughed. Xiao Wangye wants to rescue me. She still harbored some suspicion, for Xiao Xiao was enigmatic and unfathomable, and no one could guess at the workings of his mind. On a previous occasion he had helped Jiang Su, but he had now helped her, Zhang Ruan, several times over. She could not figure out what this meant. Chapter 92. 2. Chapter 92. 2. Xiao Xiao had turned to look at her. His beautiful eyes were like the star-dotted night sky, bright and sparkling. To defeat 10,000 of the enemy's troops, yet lose 3,000 of your own, is this your strategy? Kill 10,000 of the enemy, lose 3,000 of your own. The numbers may vary, but the disparity is always great. Fig. It means that even though victory has been achieved, a relatively heavy price has been paid. He had observed her methods when dealing with the Grand Counselor Fu. Without batting an eyelid, she had closed in step by step, luring the snake out of its hole, then rendering the final blow and totally decimating the Grand Counselor Fu, giving them no hope of return. Her methods were fiercely ruthless and her mind was meticulous. This was the first time in his life that he had observed these qualities in someone so young. From what he could see, her jumping off the cliff had been part of her calculations. Such calculations, where the slightest deviation could result in death, indeed required ruthless methods, and for one to be ruthless even with oneself, only someone with courage could be this courageously reckless. You're wrong. It's defeating 100,000 of the enemy's troops, and losing 3,000 of my own, Zhang Ruan corrected him. Thinking of the desperate straits the Grand Counselor Fu was in now, a sliver of elation flashed across her heart. However, she knew that this would never be enough. The suffering that Li Dong had caused her, the suffering that he had caused Pei, she had to make him repay all of it, down to the last measure. Looking pensive, Xiao Xiao asked, "Why is there such deep hatred between you and the Grand Counselor Fu?" At first, He had thought that she was one of Xian Li's people, but then he had witnessed her maneuvering Xian Li into an embarrassing and difficult situation, whereupon he knew she was not. The attack featuring the reservoir had been aimed straight at the Grand Counselor Fu. Since she had not hesitated in burying all members of the Grand Counselor Fu, there had to be a deep animosity between them. However, the genie guards he had sent out to investigate the connection had come up empty. What exactly had happened between them? When Li Dong and his son visited the Jiangfu, this was the first time Zhang Ruan and those people from the Grand Counselor Fu had met. She had then responded with cruel ruthlessness. Why? Zhang Ruan smiled slightly and said, no comment. She found it hard to be at ease with Xiao Xiao, but the words had hardly left her mouth when she coughed and her entire body suddenly felt extremely cold as she teetered on the verge of fainting. Xiao Xiao stood up. Before Zhang Ruan could gather her thoughts, she felt warmth enveloping her body. Xiao Xiao's black and gold-rained silk brocade cloak fell lightly over her. This crane-patterned cloak was nice and warm, but it was also as light as a feather. Since Xiao Xiao had just taken it off, it still held his body warmth. Then Xiao Xiao walked out of the cave, leaving a startled Zhang Ruan behind. Zhang Ruan wrapped the cloak around her. This act of receiving the cloak at the moment felt like receiving coal in the middle of winter. Her body, which had just felt as cold as an icicle, finally felt a degree of warmth. Not long later, Xiao Xiao walked back in, carrying some dry firewood which he had picked up from goodness knows where. In the middle of these cliffs, the rain never stopped falling, and the snow did not melt. It was harder to find dry firewood in this place than to climb up to the sky. With his head and body dusted with snow and frost, Xiao Xiao placed the firewood on the ground and used a fire starter to start the fire. The firewood crackled into flame and the dark of the cave immediately gave way to light, and it was so warm and cozy that it felt like an illusion. Although there is no flame at this time, the red highlights can be seen burning faintly, which can remain unextinguished for a long time. Phosphorus and some oxygen-reactive substances are present in the huozizi. If one blows on it or shakes it very quickly, these substances will react violently with the oxygen and burn. Xiao Xiao said, sit over here and dry your clothes, otherwise the cold will seep into your bones and cause many illnesses in future. Zhang Ruan did not decline his invitation. Holding the crane-patterned cloak firmly around her, she stood up and walked to sit in front of the fire. Sure enough, once near the fire, her body became much more comfortable. She could not stop herself from holding out both hands in order to warm them further. Unexpectedly, Xiao Xiao reached out to grasp her wrist. Zhang Ruan jolted in surprise, but before she could react, Xiao Xiao had already felt her pulse and quickly released her hand with a frown. He eyed her thoughtfully. Observing his expression, Zhang Ruan asked with surprise, does Xiao Wangye have something to say? Xiao Xiao shook his head, and his gaze dropped to her shoulder. Zhang Ruan had borne with the wound on her shoulder as she moved, but there was still something strange about her movements. Xiao Xiao was so alarmingly perceptive that he could tell something was wrong with one glance. After some thought, he retrieved a small celadone bottle from within his clothes and threw it into her lap. Zhang Ruan picked it up and removed the stopper after a moment's hesitation. A refreshing scent wafted out, and Xiao Xiao said indifferently, Jin Chuang Yao lit. Golden sore ointment. It will prevent scarring. Celadone bottle. Zhang Ruan smiled faintly and said, many thanks. She was even more suspicious now. That Xiao Xiao would help her was turning out to be increasingly strange. This person had always handled himself in a cold and detached manner. Why was he now so considerate of her needs? Anyway, to get back to the point at hand, he actually had medical experience. Xiao Xiao was such an enigmatic person. In her previous life, Xianli had been intent on luring him over to his side, but he was unable to unearth any inside information on Xiao Xiao, let alone know he had medical expertise. On seeing Zhang Ruan accept the medicine, Xiao Xiao did not linger, but again left the cave. It appeared that he had left to offer her some privacy, so Zhang Ruan quickly applied the medicine from the celadone bottle on her wound, then roughly bandaged it up. She had no idea that the medicine would be some kind of miracle cure. It was highly effective, such that the wound no longer hurt, and there was a cool and comforting feeling. Zhang Ruan relaxed. After a while, Xiao Xiao returned with more firewood and a freshly skinned hare. Throwing the firewood on the ground, he selected 2 branches, tore apart the hair and spitted the meat on the branches, then set them over the fire to roast. Jiang Ruan watched his movements dazedly. Xiao Xiao looked very serious as he roasted the hair. He was naturally handsome, but now this moment being in front of the fire, the flames highlighted his profile, so that he looked incomparably elegant and supremely heroic. His eyes gleamed like black lacquer, while his eyebrows were as if brushed on with ink, and his thin lips were tightly pursed. He looked for all the world like a hero roasting a hare in the wilderness of the Jianghu, and moved with a natural and unforced grace, like water flowing. His black brocade clothes outlined his slender, straight figure, and while he was always cold and detached, the flames softened his features a little, giving them just the right degree of warmth. This young man was truly, without a match, handsome and uniquely magnificent. He offered the roasted hare meat to Jiang Ruan. When he noticed that she was looking at him strangely, he lifted his eyebrows and asked, "What is it?" Jiang Ruan came back to her senses. She stared at the hare, roasted to perfection, and giving off a heady aroma. The meat had a beautiful, mouth-watering golden hue. Today, her exhaustion was bone deep, and she was famished. When she saw this delicious fare, she took it without any pretense at politeness and, forgetting her reservation towards Xiao Xiao for the time being, smiled and said, "Xiao Wangye has excellent cooking skills." Xiao Xiao wordlessly roasted his share of the meat, the expression in his eyes concealed by his long eyelashes. Jiang Ruan took a bite of hare and said, "Xiao Wangye, you are as precious as gold and rare jade. That you can manage such trifles with ease is truly unexpected." This scion of noble family who was born with a golden spoon in his mouth could not only heal people, but could also handle such menial tasks. Jiang Ruan could not help but think about the rumors regarding Xiao Xiao which she had heard in her previous life. Xiao Xiao had yet to reach adulthood when the previous genie Wang had died, and so Xiao Xiao had to take over command of the genie guards. At the beginning, everyone had been waiting for him to make a fool of himself, thinking that this young man who was still wet behind the years was only good for laughs. Who knew, after he had assumed command, Xiao Xiao managed everything with an iron will. It was not long before he established his absolutely solid standing among the genie guards, and 300,000 genie guards followed his every command. People always saw the glory without seeing the hardship that went into attaining that glory. That Xiao Xiao achieved this kind of success meant that he must have suffered much in the process. Such an unyielding and tenacious person could never be looked down on. She inclined her head to look at the young man before the fire. He was only 20 years old, but his usually calm and quiet demeanor, born of many years, made it very easy for people to overlook his age. He was assertive yet reserved and arrogant to the bone. The brocade clothes he wore for night work were distinguished yet romantic. Thus, in this gloomy, frosty and windswept place, it was possible to have the stirrings of a sense of security because of him. However, was he a friend or a foe? It was difficult to tell. Was it possible that Xiao Xiao had rescued her because of the Grand Counselor Fu? In her previous life, Xiao Xiao had, in the end, stood with the Crown Prince. Xian Li and he were absolutely irreconcilable. She had dealt with the Grand Counselor Fu, which meant that she was Xiao Xiao's friend. Was that right? Jiang Ruan softly asked the question which had been on the tip of her tongue this whole time. "Xiao Wangye, why rescue me?" At this moment in the Jiangfu all was chaos. 4 identical carriages had shot off in 4 different directions. Except for Jiang Ruan's carriage, the other 3 carriages had knocked into boulders or towering trees, and the passengers in the carriages had likewise been thrown around the entire time. The priority of Guanliang Han's men had been to find and rescue them. Jiang Li and Jiang Dan were injured to some extent, but it was not possible to tell if this was deliberate or accidental. When they finally located Jiang Susu, her injuries were the most severe out of them all. Hu Dai and Qing Ting had lacerations on their foreheads. Jiang Susu's carriage had toppled over on a long, steeply inclined slope, and when it had rolled over, Jiang Susu had been thrown out into a thorny patch of thistles. Because she was wearing a thick layer of clothes, the multitude of thorns had not hurt her body, but her face. The previous wound under the veil had already healed to a shallow scar, but the thorns had pricked her all over. When the imperial bodyguards located Jiang Susu, Her face was a mask of blood. With her frightful expression and her hoarse voice calling for help, she appeared to be some kind of demon. Guanliang Han ordered someone to escort the injured Zhang young ladies back to the Jiangfu. Xia Yan was waiting anxiously when Xiao Si came in unexpectedly to report that soldiers had escorted the carriages back. Her heart thumped alarmingly. How could it be so fast? It would take the authorities half a day to get to Shui Cliff. How could it be so fast? Then her worst fears were realized as Xiao Si said. Second young miss was also injured. Xia Yan stood up straight away. When she saw Jiang Susu's unconscious form, her insides were in turmoil and she was close to fainting. How did Jiang Susu come to be so badly injured? Why did she have to have facial injuries? In future, who would want to marry a disfigured woman as his family's furin? She grabbed a soldier and asked, "Sir, what happened?" On seeing that she was the mistress of the Jiangfu, the soldier's manner took a gentler turn. He said, Lian of the Grand Counselor Fu was raising a private army with the intent of staging a rebellion. He has been captured, and several young ladies were injured, so the general ordered us to escort them home. Already been captured. Xia Yan's face was deathly white. Lian had failed? To have such elite troops and yet to have failed? She panicked as the thought hit her. If Lian had really been captured, would he implicate her as well? She was terrified at the prospect of being charged with the crime of colluding with a traitor. Very cautiously she asked, why did he suddenly rebel? The soldier noticed that she was not tending to the Fu's injured young ladies, but was instead concerned with these inconsequential matters, and could not help but eye her doubtfully. Upon seeing this, Xia Yan promptly said, "What does this villainous rebel have to do with my Fu's young ladies, such that they would be so wronged? I wish I could skin him alive. Going to prison is too good for him." The soldier, no longer suspicious, said, "He has already been escorted back to the capital city. The young ladies in your Fu are all safe and sound, apart from eldest Zhang, Mississippi." Xia Yan's heart skipped a beat. It was only then that she realized that Zhang Ruan had not returned. With a great effort, she suppressed her elation, and affected an exceedingly anxious appearance to ask, "Sir, what do you mean? What has happened to Ruaner?" The soldier apologetically looked at her and said, "Eldest Zhang Miss was forced into a dangerous situation by Lian, so she voluntarily jumped off the cliff. The general has already sent men to look for her, so foreign need not be too worried." The gloom that had settled on Xia Ya's heart, due to Jiang Susu's disfigurement, was instantly swept away. She was dying to scream out loud, Zhang Ruan was dead. Zhang Ruan was dead. How could anyone survive jumping off the cliff? Perhaps the wolves would devour her corpse and leave nothing behind, not even the bones. Outwardly, her expression changed. Suddenly, her eyes filled with tears, and she looked as if she had suffered a terrible blow. She mumbled to herself, "My Ruaner? Foreign, please don't worry. If you really want to worry about someone, then you should be concerned about the Fu's second young master." Chow! Xia Yan laughed stiffly, and a vague premonition flitted across her heart. What about Chower? The rebel soldiers were pursuing the 4 young ladies with the intention of killing them, but completely ignored second young master Jiang. When the general found your second son, he was still sitting in the carriage, leisurely drinking tea. The general suspected that he was in collusion with the rebel troops, so he has been imprisoned with Lian. Xia Yan could not seem to get a grip on herself. What? How could Chower be a traitor? You all have definitely made a mistake. Chower is innocent. The soldier bowed to her and said, "We will know what is going on after the interrogations have been completed." Having said this, he turned and was just about to leave when he suddenly remembered something and turned back to say, "Foreign, take comfort. Although eldest Zhang Miss jumped off the cliff, Jining Wang has personally descended to the base of the cliff to rescue her. She ought to return safely." Once he had finished speaking, he departed without looking back. Xia Yan stood where she was, staring blankly for a moment. Abruptly, the world before her turned black, and she fainted. Chapter 93. 1. Chapter 93. 1. The light in the cave flickered. The surroundings were crude, but the firelight made the scene somehow moving. Shrubbery had been used to block the cave mouth tightly so that the cold wind could not enter. Jiang Ruan leaned against a rock in front of the fire and closed her eyes in weariness. At such a tense time, they were a single man and a single woman together in a secluded setting. Yet, contrary to what one might expect, she was not the least concerned that Xiao Xiao would do anything to her. In her previous life he had been notorious for being cold and detached, completely indifferent to feminine charms. Xianli had attempted to gift him with beautiful women many times but, in the end, had to return without success. Moreover, at present she was still quite young, and was currently in such a sorry state. If he could even consider making a move towards her in this state, then he must be blind. After using Xiao Xiao's medicine and eating something, her body was gradually warming up. After rushing about the entire day, she was truly exhausted. Thus, she could not stop herself from drifting into slumber. Before she fell asleep, she thought about the question she had asked Xiao Xiao, and how he had answered. He said, "Xiao Mao owes you his life. It is used to refer to oneself." What did this mean? Jiang Ruan fell into a deep sleep. The young man who was staring into the fire, lost in thought, turned to look at her pensively for quite a while. The young lady had shed the incisiveness and hostility that accompanied her customary antagonistic, tit-for-tat nature, and all that remained was a gentle and beautiful appearance. The facial features she had been born with were bright and beautiful, and the glow of the fire enhanced them with a faint charm. In time she would definitely be a vibrant beauty. However, the beautiful scene before his eyes did not tug at his heartstrings in the slightest. He merely lowered his head and retrieved an object from his sleeve. That bright, inlaid jade dye Lianhua pendant earring. Time seemed to run backwards to 5 years ago. 5 years ago, he had already accepted command of the genie guards for 5 years. He had just finished his martial arts training when he received a mission, and his opponent was a fierce, tough commander in South Xinjiang. It was not the commander himself who was to be feared, but the sorcerer by his side whose methods were bizarre. In order to cement his standing in the genie guards, as well as to preserve the secrecy of the mission, he had penetrated deeply into South Xinjiang by himself. After 7 days and 7 nights of moving around, he killed the commander and the sorcerer. However, the sorcerer used his familiarity with the region's terrain to harm him via goo poison. A legendary venomous insect, could also mean to poison, bewitch, drive to insanity, harm by witchcraft. Also an intestinal parasite. The people of South Xinjiang would not help him remove the parasite. So the teenaged youth spurred his horse on towards the capital, barely managing to hang on to life the whole journey. The people who wanted him dead in the capital were too many to count, and as soon as the people of South Xinjiang broadcasted the news that he was grievously injured, the dark, hidden places of the capital were crawling with assassins. Even though he was highly skilled in martial arts, he was unable to hold back the overwhelming effect of the goo. His entire body felt weak, and he was ambushed multiple times on his way back to the capital, leaving him bruised and wounded. This was the worst state of injury he had ever experienced. In front of him, more men in ambush. Behind him, troops in pursuit. In a moment of desperation, he sought refuge in a prayer hall in Baoguang Temple. But there was someone there. Under the moonlight, a young girl stared at him dumbfounded. Xiao Xiao frowned and a glinting dagger appeared in his hand. However, the girl moved forward clumsily and asked in surprise, "You're hurt?" He had suffered countless serious injuries, and his black clothes were soaked with blood. Even though it could not be seen, the reek of blood was evident. As he sat there in a daze, she quickly knelt down beside him and retrieved a small porcelain bottle from her clothes. She said, "This is medicine for your wound. Are you all right?" The medicine was ordinary, without any special healing properties. When the young girl carefully pulled away his clothes, he was initially wary, but observing her awkward posture, he thought to himself that the situation was quite ridiculous. Such a young girl. Who knew which family's maidservant she was? He assumed she was a maidservant because she was dressed as one. Her words were unaffected yet quick-witted. Although the illumination provided by the moonlight was faint, her face was clearly visible. It was delicate and smooth, and her aura was captivating. Her big eyes were alert, clear, and glistening. She was indeed a natural beauty. However, even though she was a maidservant, her demeanor did not seem to be like one. He felt slightly astonished. The young girl insisted on applying medicine for him. He was exceedingly weak and unable to move, and believed that he would without a doubt die that night. Even if he could elude the assassins pursuing him, he did not know if he could endure the full force of the goo poison. Either way, the result would be death, which would cause the young girl torment. When the young girl saw that his breathing was becoming weaker, her eyes filled with tears. Without warning, she stood up and ran outside. He thought that she had run out to call someone, but he had absolutely no strength to stop her, and also had no will to do so. He slumped in the room, waiting for his moment of death to arrive. Under the waning moonlight, the youth's appearance was exceptional, yet his expression was cold and detached. All this time he had battled extreme danger just to take one step after another to move forward. The higher his position, the more stable it was, yet the more desolate and empty. He did not know the meaning of life, and neither did he know why he lived. But not long after, the young girl returned. She held food and clean water in her hands, but her face was bruised. So she pushed the items towards him and said, "Eat if you eat, you'll regain your strength." Xiao Xiao had some knowledge of medicine, and when he looked at the marks on the young girl's face, he knew she had been beaten by someone. Such a quick-witted and graceful young girl, how could anyone beat her so? He frowned and glanced at the food on the ground. Then he understood this little maidservant had probably been caught by someone as she stole the food for him, resulting in her bruises. Something stirred in his heart. The young girl looked at him eagerly, and realizing that he was not moving, she did her best to lift the bowl and brought it to his lips. He was indeed thirsty, so he lowered his head to drink. Although the young girl was struggling to help him, her movements were practiced, by which he surmised that she regularly served people tea. "Don't die," the young girl looked at him and said. "I won't tell anyone you're here." Xiao Xiao remained silent. The young girl started to feed him a steamed bun. Slowly she began to talk. She spoke of nothing serious, just that the pear blossoms in the western mountains would be blooming in a few days' time, and so would the peach blossoms in the eastern mountains. She wanted to see the flowers with her mother and father. She wanted to make new clothes and new shoes. The girl next door had raised a small hunting hound, so she wanted one too. The essay her older brother had recently written had won her father's praise. One day in future he would definitely be the Zhuangyuan, top scorer in the imperial examinations. Thus she chitter-chattered away, doing her utmost to talk about something of interest to lift his spirits so that he would not become drowsy and sleep. Xiao Xiao clearly understood her tender and innocent intentions, and her determination caused him to act as if he had heard something funny, even though he had no interest in what she was saying. He felt that this young girl must come from a happy and blessed family in order for her to be born so kind-hearted and warm. Indeed, all the descriptions that tumbled out of her mouth were expressed with abundant interest. Surprisingly, the goo poison did not flare up that night. Moreover, applying the rudimentary medicine and eating the food offered to him had helped him gradually regain his strength. In that prayer hall in Baoguang Temple, a night of moonlight, a night of spring breeze, a youth and a young girl, one person sitting quietly, one person prattling on, the scene was surprisingly harmonious. She talked the entire night, but when dawn broke on the second day, and the gong for the morning gruel sounded, a soft call came from outside. "Miss." The young girl stood up abruptly and said, "My maidservant is calling for me. Leave quickly when you have recovered. Be careful not to be discovered." So, she was not a maidservant after all. Xiao Xiao whispered, "Many thanks." The young girl had already walked to the door, but she suddenly turned her head on hearing his words. She looked at him with a smile and said, "There's no need for thanks. Today I saved your life. In future, should I be trapped in some dangerous circumstances, and you happen to pass by, just save my life in return." In the end, he did not die that day. After his health had slowly been restored in Baoguang Temple, he sent the genie guards a signal. He waited until his return to the capital before moving swiftly with unstoppable power to deal with the assassins out for his blood, who were lurking in the capital city. He cemented his position as the commander of the 300,000 genie guards, and for a period of time, the secret alleys of the capital were purged clean. From that time onwards, everyone in the imperial court avoided him as if he were taboo, and he was given the name rebellious scoundrel. He had absolutely no idea who the young girl in the Baoguang temple that night was, his only clue being the earring that she had dropped. The Xiao family understood the meaning of gratitude, and so he dispatched Yifeng to investigate. Yifeng discovered that a young lady from the Zhang family had been at the temple that day to offer incense, and it was second Zhang Miss. Therefore, when Zhang Susu found herself in a desperate situation on Linglong boat, he remembered the commitment he had made. In future, should I be trapped in some dangerous circumstances, and you happen to pass by, just save my life in return, and he had helped her once. From a young age, Xiao Xiao had lived a cruelly dangerous life, often walking on a knife's edge, as entrapments and risks were commonplace. He had endured what ordinary people could not, he had experienced what ordinary people never would, and his intuition was spectacularly precise. After he had rescued Zhang Susu, he had already felt that something was amiss. Dao Ko Shang Tian Shui. The background for this idiom seems to be as follows. Hunters will bury sharp knives, coated with sheep's blood in the snow. A hungry wolf will lick the knife and unknowingly cause its own blood to flow, thereby also increasing its bloodlust, but will not realize it until it faints and slash or dies from blood loss. It, therefore, is used to describe a life that is full of danger and cruelty. In the capital, Zhang Susu had a wonderful reputation, and she was also called ethereal and fairy-like. She was good-hearted and innocent, and her talent was peerless. She was truly the Zhang family's much-beloved pearl. This was very much in accordance with the wholly good-hearted young girl from that night. However, with one glance he had ascertained this female's hypocrisy and pretense, and found it difficult in reality to connect the two persons. It was at this time that Zhang Ruan appeared. Zhang Ruan's eyes and those of the young girl were strikingly similar, yet they were also not similar. Zhang Ruan's murderous spirit and vicious tendencies could be seen in her eyes, her behavior was merciless, and she had honed to perfection the art of attacking using the strength of another while keeping her own hands clean. Such a shrewd and subtle person was a complete contrast to the young girl from that night. Huhua Chunqing. Lit. The stove fire has turned to bright green, allusion to Taoist alchemy. Fig. Brought to the point of perfection. Jiedao Sharen. Lit. Lending someone a knife to kill someone else. Fig. To get someone else to do one's dirty work. To attack using the strength of another. What's more, his genie guards had found out that Zhang Ruan was not regarded as someone of value in the Zhang Fu. Zhang Quan was not fond of her, her mother had died young, and her older brother was dejected by his unfulfilled aspirations. Where was the happiness that the young girl had spoken of? His intuition and reality were poles apart. Yet, now that the whole truth had been revealed, everything gained clarity in an instant. So, it turned out that Zhang Susu was not the young girl that night, after all. Chapter 93. 2. Chapter 93. 2. Since Zhang Ruan was the young girl at Baoguang Temple, how did her good-hearted and innocent temperament become so aggressive and menacing? Could 5 years of oppression in the rural residence and her biological father and stepmother making life difficult for her really have caused such a transformation? Setting aside the change in temperament, how could such a young lady come up with methods like these? There was also another mystery surrounding her. Huiju's prophecies were all thanks to her, as was the early warning of the flood situation in the capital. Who on earth was she? Xiao Xiao returned the jade pendant earring to his sleeve, and his eyes shone like brilliant starlight in the depths of the night as he pursed his lips. As the pendant earring had confirmed it, he owed Zhang Ruan his life, and he would surely repay her in future. Many thanks, he said softly. Zhang Ruan had a dream. The time period in the dream seemed to be a long time ago, so she wasn't too sure when it was, but it was very likely 5 years ago. 5 years ago, Zhao Mei was bedridden with a serious illness. A doctor had come to examine her, but then pronounced it a hopeless situation and suggested that it would be best to start considering the funeral arrangements. She looked upon Zhao Mei's emaciated body lying on the bed, and her heart felt sorrow beyond measure. It just so happened that it was time for the annual visit to Baoguang Temple to offer incense. Baoguang Temple's Tuzhu incense was the most efficacious, and she wanted to go and offer incense. However, Jiang Quan said that since Zhao Mei was gravely ill, and Jiang Ruan was her biological daughter, she should stay behind to tend to her. At that time, Jiang Ruan had felt frustrated and angry, but could also not refute Jiang Quan openly. So she decided to secretly follow Xia Yan in Jiang Susu's carriage, dressed as a Jiang Fu maidservant and blending in with them. Once she reached Baoguang Temple, she would beg the head monk to allow her to burn one stick of incense, to plead that Zhao Mei's condition would take a turn for the better. Thus she asked Lien Qiao to accompany her, and left Bai Ji in the fu to pretend to be her. She changed into a maidservant's outfit, and completely blended in with the other maidservants, and they all went off to Baoguang Temple together. That was the boldest thing she had ever done. After she had succeeded in infiltrating the group of servants, she felt proud of herself for a time. However, she did not know that the ease with which she had become part of the group was because Xia Yan had known much earlier that she was there, and had deliberately let it pass. After that, she seized the opportunity when no one was paying attention to her to hide in a prayer hall, waiting for an opportune time to slip out. Even though she had infiltrated the group of servants, she could not eat the vegetarian meal with the maidservants, so as not to be found out. She could only visit the temple's kitchen secretly in order to steal some food. She never thought that she would be discovered and handed over to the Jiang Fu's head servant, in order to be well disciplined. That old female servant did indeed discipline her firmly. She was beaten black and blue but did not dare call out, for fear of her identity as eldest Jiang Miss being disclosed. At that time, her body bore a multitude of bruises, a witness to her great difficulty in obtaining a portion of food. The situation did not end there. The next day, she was unable to burn the Tuzhu incense. Even though Baoguang Temple was so well regarded, in reality, favor was determined by how much was donated via the buying of incense. Since Xia Yan had donated a considerable sum of money to the temple, she was the one who offered the incense. Oh! On thinking about it, her heart's desire at that time must have been that Zhao Mei and Jiang Ruan died horrible deaths. In Jiang Ruan's previous life, the incense offered due to this desire had certainly been efficacious. On the way home, Xia Yan accidentally discovered she was in the crowd, and they returned to the fu in such an uproar that her name was known in every household. When Jiang Quan found out that Bai Ji had pretended to be her in the fu, he was boiling with rage, and made her and Bai Ji kneel in the fu's main hall in front of all the servants while they were punished according to the rules of the fu. Shame, resentment, anger, aggrievement. Her emotions at that time were multitudinous, but, in the end, they could only be manifested in completely useless tears. Zhang Exinji went head-to-head with Jiang Quan on her behalf, and was made to kneel in the ancestral hall for 3 days as punishment. When Zhao Mei heard about it, her condition worsened until she was even closer to death's door. As the situation escalated, Xia Yan and Jiang Susu came to plead for leniency on her behalf. On thinking about it now, she was itching to skin them both alive. It seemed that, from that time onwards, everyone began to ostracize her and she was even forbidden to step foot outside. Eventually, the people in the capital only knew of the Jiang family's second miss, with no idea who the Jiang family's eldest miss was. From that time onwards, Baoguang Temple had become her nightmare. In this life, Xia Yan had still thought of scheming against her at Baoguang Temple, and had hoped that she would agree to go. If it could be said that Baoguang Temple was her execution ground in her previous life, then in this life it was the stage for the massacre she had orchestrated. For the Grand Counselor Fu, it had only just begun. At the end of her dream there seemed to be a gleam of moonlight, in which a pair of eyes like cold stars in a gentle night, twinkled at her brightly while impassively watching her. Who was that? It was as if, within the memory of having stolen the food that night, she had not been the one to eat the food in the end. It was as if something extraordinary had happened in the prayer hall that night. Time is like a musty veil of light muslin concealing a treasure, quietly covering our memories. If, one day, a spring breeze should happen to blow, lifting a corner of the veil, the memories will be as fresh as before, still emitting a faint luster. It was as if she heard a cold, indifferent voice whispering beside her, "Many thanks." Who was it? Sunlight gradually filtered through the dense shrubbery and into the mountain cave, the interior of which appeared a mottled green due to this tiny gleam of light. The long-absent sun, in all its glorious warmth, was reflected in the verdant mountain forest. Clear and melodious birdsong twittered through the desolate mountains and steep valleys. With a sudden flutter and flap of wings, the birds flew away. Light ripples danced across the surface of a tranquil green lake, which tapered to a point at one end. The weather had cleared. Jiang Ruan unhurriedly opened her eyes. When she had opened them, she saw that the sorely missed sunlight was illuminating the cave. She had slept peacefully the entire night, and she was in exceptionally good spirits. She tilted her head from one side to the other, and abruptly went rigid. Her body was leaning against something warm, and her arms were tightly wound around an unfamiliar waist, clad in ice-cold stiff black brocade. When she looked up, she found a pair of beautiful eyes looking down at her. Quickly Jiang Ruan withdrew her arms. Had she really slept all night embracing Xiao Xiao? No, holding on to Xiao Xiao's waist. Observing their current position, it seemed as though she had enthusiastically taken the initiative to hold on to him. Jiang Ruan took a breath. Strangely, Xiao Xiao did not seem to notice. When he saw she had awoken, he stood up and said, "I have made a mark outside. They will be able to get here quickly once they see it." Jiang Ruan's clothes were already dry. She took off the black and gold, crane-patterned cloak and gave it back to Xiao Xiao, saying, "Many thanks, Xiao Wang." As if something had come to mind, Xiao Xiao turned and addressed her. "Your body is very weak, and you have a tendency towards coldness star. In the Fu, pay more attention to what you eat and drink." Han Liang. Lit. Cold. According to traditional Chinese medicine, everything in nature is a balance of yin dark and yang bright energy. If there is an excess of yang energy, then your body is heaty, whereas an excess of yin energy causes one's body to be cooling. One can be innately heaty or cooling. Symptoms of coldness include a pale face, lethargy, cold hands and feet, and an intolerance to cold. It is recommended that people with a cold constitution eat more heaty foods to achieve a balance, and thus to dispel cold and improve circulation. More here. He did not say anything further, but Jiang Ruan felt that there was a hidden meaning behind his words. Someone had poisoned her. Xiao Xiao noticed the unasked question in her eyes and said, "This cold constitution was developed in the womb, and has been worsening continuously. It has been present for many years." Jiang Ruan looked down. So, there was also such a situation. In her previous life, had Jiang Quan and Xianli already known about this, and thus agreed without qualms to allow her to take the place of Jiang Su in entering the palace, so that the healthy and perfect Jiang family daughter could be kept for the new emperor, to be his empress. No, that wasn't it. Even if she did not have this cold constitution, Jiang Quan would not have let her remain in place. Jiang Quan and Xianli had chosen her to be the sacrificial lamb from the start. However, Xiao Xiao did her a favor by telling her this. His helping her in this way reminded Jiang Ruan of his words the previous night. He owed her his life. She was about to ask him to clarify his statement, when she suddenly heard the sound of horses' hooves outside. Xiao Xiao pushed aside the shrubbery at the mouth of the cave, and sure enough, a pleasantly surprised voice could be heard saying, "Wang Ya." Jiang Ruan walked out as well. Outside, the sun was shining brilliantly. Within the forest, a group of horses and troops saw them, and rode in their direction in quick succession. Foremost among them were Guanliang Han and Jiang Xianji. R1. Third brother. After searching fruitlessly for an entire night, Guanliang Han and Jiang Xianji were extremely anxious, especially Jiang Xianji, who hated that he could not comb through the entire mountain. His hands were constantly trembling. Now, on seeing Jiang Ruan safe and sound, he let out a long relieved breath. Calling her name, he raced towards her on horseback. The soldiers also rushed over. In front of the mountain cave, the black-clad youth and the young lady in plain clothes stood, bathed in the sunlight, looking into the distance, and presenting a sight to warm the heart. When Jiang Xianji drew nearer, the expression on his face morphed into something more complicated. Jiang Ruan's hair was mussed, her clothes were slightly disorderly, and a man's black and gold rain silk crane-patterned brocade cloak was still in her hand. She looked as if she had woken up not long ago, and her face was still rosy, just like the most beautiful rose-tinted clouds at sunrise, exquisitely gorgeous. On the other hand, Xiao Xiao presented a cold and detached countenance. Yet, at that moment he seemed to think of something and his eyes became softer and gentler. Such a scene lay before everyone's eyes, and immediately inspired a myriad of contrasting thoughts. These two possessed a natural beauty that was indeed rare, and even with the difficulties they had just experienced, their graceful bearing and beauty still shone through. Moreover, the slight smiles on their faces at present brought the same thought to the minds of everyone there. It was truly, exceptionally harmonious. Chapter 94. 1. Chapter 94. 1. Zhang Xing leapt off his horse and strode quickly to Zhang Ruan. Calmly, he pulled her until she was behind him and therefore blocked from Xiao Xiao's view. Xiao Xiao watched his movements wordlessly. Guanliang Han had reached them by now and asked, "Anything wrong?" Xiao Xiao shook his head. Then Zhang Xing turned to assess Zhang Ruan. When he saw the sorry state she was in, including the blood from the shoulder wound that had seeped through her clothes, his face turned cold and he said, "Ruan, you're hurt." "It's just a superficial wound," Zhang Ruan said soothingly. She paused, then stepped forward to say, "Xiao Wangya, many thanks for your grace in saving my life." Hearing this, Guanliang Han and Zhang Xing looked rather odd. Guanliang Han had personal experience, but Zhang Xing had only heard from other people. No matter which way one looked at it, there was no way there could be a relationship between Xiao Xiao and Zhang Ruan, so for Xiao Xiao to personally jump off the cliff to rescue her seemed totally outrageous to him. Guanliang Han had initially not believed Emotsong's drivel. Xiao Xiao was both cold-hearted and cold-faced, so how could he possibly be interested in a young lady whom he had only met a few times? Moreover, Guanliang Han ran a critical eye over Zhang Ruan. She was beautiful, but when all was said and done, she was still quite young, and there were plenty of women in the capital who piqued one's interest more than she did. Moreover, she possessed no special charm. However, on thinking about the scene he had just witnessed, Guanliang Han felt uncertain again. Zhang Xing was different from Guanliang Han. He had had very little interaction with Xiao Xiao, and had been completely ignorant of matters in the capital when he left 5 years prior. Now Zhang Ruan was his most beloved, precious little sister, so he glared at Xiao Xiao as if he were Deng Tuzi. He held on to Zhang Ruan tightly, not allowing her to step forward any further, and said stiffly, "Xing thanks Xiao Wangya on behalf of his Mimi for your grace in saving her life." The main character of a fable written by Song Yu of the Chu Kingdom during the Warring States period. It's uncertain if the fable was based on a real person, but Deng Tuzi is commonly used to indicate a lecherous person. He thought Zhang Ruan was young, and naturally did not understand men. This Xiao Xiao was not only a man through and through, he was also an important man with a high status. Zhang Ruan was still young and prone to only hearing what she wanted to hear. He could not allow her to be taken advantage of. Thinking of all this, he glared at Xiao Xiao with even greater hostility. Since Zhang Ruan and Zhang Xing were siblings with a close bond, she naturally understood what he was thinking about, but was momentarily at a loss of what to do. On the other hand, Yi Feng had to restrain his rising indignance. In his heart, he cried out against this injustice towards his master. He thought of his master's brilliance in all aspects, and the numerous young ladies in the capital who were dying to align themselves with him. What kind of expression was that on Zhang Xing's face? Clearly Zhang Ruan had taken advantage of his master. With these thoughts flashing through his mind, he glared at Zhang Xing. As it happened, Xiao Xiao noticed him doing this and eyed him impassively. Yi Feng suddenly recalled the circumstances surrounding the jade pendant earring. He trembled and lowered his head hesitantly. The atmosphere became highly peculiar. Zhang Xing pulled Zhang Ruan back a step and said, "Wangya General, Zhang Ruan has had a shock, and is also injured, so Xing will bring her back to the Fu for treatment. After Xing has escorted Mimi back to the Fu, Xing will visit the general to discuss what happens next." Guanliang Han was familiar with Zhang Xing's deep, sacrificial love for his sister, so he merely waved his hand and said, Go, you're talking as if we are ravenous wolf. Zhang Xing blushed faintly, but he persisted in his attitude. Zhang Ruan muttered to herself before breaking free from Zhang Xing's hold. She said, Dage, I wish to speak to Xiao Wangye alone about something. As soon as these words were uttered, silence descended on the scene, such that one could hear a pin drop. Everyone's eyes were burning into those two people. Yi Feng stood docilely where he was, but his ears were pricked up. His face reflected his emotions, part sorrow and part joy, and he thought to himself, this is no good, master has indeed lost his innocence. Guanliang Han looked at Zhang Ruan meaningfully, then at Xiao Xiao, and a mischievous smile lit up his face. Still pretending there's no issue. There's absolutely definitely an issue. Zhang Xing stared at Zhang Ruan dumbfounded. For a split second, grief flashed across his features, and he glowered at Xiao Xiao as if he were the enemy. In one accord with identical there's definitely an issue expressions on their faces, everyone gaped at the two people in question. These two people, however, were calm and at ease. Xiao Xiao nodded and said, fine. Zhang Ruan surveyed the curious, gossip-hungry expressions around her, and sighed inwardly. She actually did not intend to be involved with this person in any way. The best option would be estranged from him, but there were some matters where she had no choice but to make use of him or the means at his disposal. Unfortunately, this would cause people to misunderstand the situation. Both of them walked into the forest. Xiao Xiao took the lead, and when they had walked quite a distance, he stopped, turned and said to her, this is far enough, they can't hear us. Guanliang Han and the others possessed excellent martial arts skills, and their ears were almost abnormally acute. Since she had not wanted to be surrounded by people when speaking to him, she had clearly not wanted anyone to eavesdrop. That Xiao Xiao had thought of this proved that he was highly considerate. Zhang Ruan looked up at him just as the rising sun cast its light over the mountains and forests. The warm golden rays illuminated his face, rendering it even more handsome. His pitch-black eyes were like twinkling gems, elegant and aristocratic. She was almost dazzled by this sight, but she recovered in a flash and smiled slightly to say, Xiao Wangye, last night, you said that you owed me your life. At that time, she had been exceedingly weary, and had been unable to properly consider the meaning of his words before she had fallen into a deep sleep. This morning, Zhang Xing had come upon them before she had had the opportunity to ask him what he had meant. Yes, replied Xiao Xiao. Zhang Ruan fixed her eyes upon him and said, does Xiao Wangye wish to return the favor? She had changed her mind. She no longer wanted to inquire into the sequence of events that had led to that statement, for what good would that do? If she had a useful tool in her hands, then she should make use of it, such as the Xiao Xiao standing before her. Yes, Xiao Xiao replied. Did Xiao Wangye help second younger sister because you thought she was me? Zhang Ruan asked. Xiao Xiao coming to Zhang Susu's aid without reason was already baffling, but thereafter, all the signs indicated that he was emphatically not on Zhang Susu's side. The situation on Ling Long boat had been odd in many ways. From the time he helped Zhang Susu on that occasion, Xiao Xiao had repeatedly helped her Jr. Zhang Ruan had just come to realize that Xiao Xiao might well have acted that way towards Zhang Susu if he had thought Zhang Susu was her. She watched Xiao Xiao closely as he nodded and said, yes. 3 short, sharp yes. But they were decidedly resolute. Abruptly, Zhang Ruan smiled and said, I now understand. Since Xiao Wangye wishes to return the favor, there is an opportunity at present. She said this quickly but steadily, almost as if she had spoken without thinking about it. This just showed how long these words had been hidden in her heart. Xiao Xiao observed her attentively, having noted the businesslike manner with which she had spoken. He asked, what are you thinking of doing? The Grand Counselor Fu secretly conspired to rebel. In this lifetime their crime is unforgivable, and they are undoubtedly on the road to ruin. I want Xiao Wangye to protect their lives, and hand Li Dong and his 2 sons over to me. Xiao Xiao studied her seriously but did not ask for her reasons, only nodding as he replied, all right. This time it was Zhang Ruan's turn to be astonished. Rumor had it that Jinying Wang was cold and merciless, but from all that she had presently seen, he was actually amazingly good at heart. She frowned minutely. Did he really take his commitment to returning the favor of saving his life so seriously? However, she had to do this. She had originally thought of handing the matter over to Zhang Xing to take care of, but Zhang Xing had recently been promoted to deputy general, and he would definitely face some difficulties in breaking Li Dong and his sons out of prison. Even if they somehow succeeded, if, in future, someone were to investigate and a mishap occurred, Zhang Xing would be in trouble. There was no need to even consider the Zhao family. With Zhao Guang's stubbornly neutral stand, he would probably not agree to take this risk. In fact, he might even be suspicious of her methods. She was absolutely unwilling to let the matter lapse like this, especially since such a rare opportunity had presented itself. Although she did not fully understand Xiao Xiao or know much about him, she knew that, in her previous life, this man had been steadfast by nature, and would always keep his word. In many aspects he was truly a rare specimen, a real man. Moreover, Xiao Xiao had a vast network of connections and great authority. If he stepped in to take care of this matter, there would be a much higher possibility of success. She smiled at Xiao Xiao and said, "Many thanks, Wang." Chapter 94. 2. Chapter 94. 2. On the entire journey back to the Fu, Zhang Xing attempted to ask, in an indirect manner, what had transpired between Zhang Ruan and Xiao Xiao the previous night. Zhang Ruan would only state that nothing had happened, but Zhang Xing did not look as if he believed her. And so, taking her to one side, he said, "Ruan, you're still young at present, and many things are still unclear to you. In future, when you meet men, you must open your eyes and not be deceived by them. Don't let some flowery-tongued man trick you into giving him your affection." Wasn't this precisely the way of looking at men she had been taught from a young age? Zhang Ruan sighed inwardly and said to Zhang Xing, "What kind of expectations does Dage think I have about men after I have experienced our father?" Zhang Xing was dumbstruck. Zhang Ruan looked at him as she said in a serious tone, "From the time I was young, I have witnessed this world's most heartless and fickle man, so how could I possibly fall prey to some man's flowery speech? Not just now, but even in future. When I reach marriageable age, I do not intend to be married to a stranger, to have to live out my life with him, to have to fight and scheme against others in the residence all day long. I only wish to follow Dage. It is of no consequence if I never marry." This was indeed the truth. She had brought her hatred with her into this life, only desiring to send her enemies to hell by her own hand. Those men that Zhang Xing was talking about. If she ever met one of them, she would still not be able to know, she would be unwilling to be entangled with them. Zhang Xing observed his own younger sister's serious demeanor, and his heart was shaken. Zhang Ruan had said all this dispassionately, but in that moment, he felt a kind of deep melancholy. Even though they were brother and sister, born of the same parents with a close bond, he had no way to take on even the smallest portion of her burden. He could only gaze upon her solitary figure, like a ghost which would disappear from this world in the very next second. After a heartbeat, he said softly, "That would also be inappropriate. Although all the men on this earth have the same lack of moral values, if you wait you will eventually be able to find one or two who aren't that bad. To remain unmarried your entire life also won't do." Zhang Ruan had nothing to say in response. When the two of them returned to the Jiangfu, they found Lu Zhu and Bai Ji waiting for them at the gate, having been informed of the news beforehand. When they saw Zhang Ruan, they teared up and called out, "Miss!" Lu Zhu and Bai Ji surged forward to support Zhang Ruan. When they saw the state of Zhang Ruan's clothes, they cried out in alarm, "Miss is hurt." Bai Ji looked over her in panic, but Zhang Xing said, "Ruan, I'm going to look for a doctor. You go ahead to your courtyard and rest. You two maidservants go look for some ginger soup." She spent the night outdoors, and it will be a mercy if she manages to avoid catching a chill. Bai Ji and Lu Zhu hurriedly acquiesced and supported Zhang Ruan back to her residence. Once she was lying down on the couch, Bai Ji set off in search of ginger soup, while Lu Zhu changed Zhang Ruan into a set of clean clothes. Zhang Ruan asked, "How is Lian Qiao?" Lian Qiao had been dealt a blow by Lian which resulted in her coughing up blood, and Zhang Ruan did not know her current condition. Lu Zhu said, "Lian Qiao Jie is all right. Young master called a doctor over, who said that she would recover in half a month. But Mrs. Hurt? She brought clean water and very carefully helped Jiang Ruan to wash the wound which had been crudely treated the night before. In surprise she said, the wound has already scabbed over. That's good. The flesh has knit together instead of the wound becoming worse. Jiang Ruan followed her line of sight. Sure enough, the wound she had sustained the previous night had already formed a superficial scar. She gave it some thought, then drew out the celadone bottle Xiao Xiao had given her from her sleeve and said to Lu Zhu, "This is a medicine for wounds, put it away carefully." The medicine was so effective, and they would more likely than not have to use it again in future. When Lu Zhu looked at the medicine and smelt it, she knew it was a good product. Without saying anything further, she took the bottle and went off to look for a place to store it. Bai Ji returned with a bowl of soup in her hands. Jiang Ruan received it and took a sip and felt her ice-cold appendages warming up slightly. She asked, "What's the situation at Yanhua Yuan?" When Bai Ji heard this question, she laughed and said, "In total chaos. Second Miss returned yesterday with her face covered in blood. It seems that she fell into thorny shrubbery when her carriage toppled over. It took a long time for the soldiers to find her, and the opportunity to render her medical assistance was delayed. So the doctor says that her face may be scarred." A delay? Jiang Ruan frowned. The previous day, the soldiers conducting the search were all either Guan family troops or Zhao family troops. However, it didn't matter whose troops they were since they were all under the command of Jiang Xing. Could it be that this was deliberately done? Naturally, she was not going to shed any tears for Jiang Su. She heard Bai Ji continue saying, "Furthermore, second young master is truly a blockhead." While all of this was going on, he simply sat alone in the carriage and emerged without a single scratch. Thus, he has been regarded as being in collusion with the rebels and seized. Yanhua Yuan is now in a pitiful state, thinking of ways to rescue second young master. Jiang Ruan was somewhat amazed on hearing this. She put down her bowl and said, "He's actually been seized. He's clearly suffering the consequences of his own actions," Lu Zhu said, having returned after storing the medicine away. She continued, "I heard that second young master sat in his carriage the whole time leisurely drinking tea and completely at ease. When the soldiers found him, their faces turned green." She found what she had just said funny, and laughed out loud with a pew sound. Jiang Ruan pondered deeply. With Jiang Chao's temperament, it was not unlikely that he had behaved this way. He was conceited and had no idea what forbearance was. Once he felt that a situation was slightly favorable, he would get carried away and become complacent. Perhaps at that time, he had been positive that the person who would meet with an accident was Jiang Ruan, and the panic which the carriages of Jiang Su and the other young ladies had been thrown into was merely for show. He definitely did not think that the soldiers would reach their location so quickly, and with such speed that he was unable to put on the mask of someone who had been terrorized by mountain bandits in time. Truly an utter blockhead. However, Jiang Ruan also knew it would not be possible to convict Jiang Chao of the crime of colluding with rebels simply based on this alone. As long as no definite proof turned up, no one could convict Jiang Chao. However, even though he would not be sentenced to death, it would certainly not be easy to help him escape from that oppressive prison. "Xia Yan, I'm afraid you'll have to rack your brains to resolve this matter." As she was engaged in thought, a third-ranked maidservant knocked timidly at the door. Jiang Ruan motioned her to enter, and the maidservant said, "Miss Foreign's personal servant Lin Lang Jejia is asking you to pay a visit to Yanhua Yuan." Who put this idea in her head? Jiang Ruan smiled faintly, and mockery flashed in her eyes for a brief moment. She picked up the bowl of ginger soup and gently moved it from side to side, causing the vapor from the warm soup to spiral upwards, obscuring her eyes. Bai Ji's eyes opened wide as she glared at the maidservant. Imitating Lian Xiao's customary shrewish attitude, she said, "Are you blind? Can't you see that Miss has narrowly escaped death, is hurt, and is in poor health? We're so fearful that she won't even have the strength to walk, and we're waiting for the doctor to examine her. Foreign's heart is merciful. How could she possibly be so inconsiderate towards Miss? It must be that you, wretched hussy, are spouting nonsense." The third-class maidservant was taken aback, and shook her head repeatedly, saying, "This servant would not dare to tell lies." Lu Zhu said impatiently, "What are you still doing here? Quickly return with this reply. Our family's young miss needs to rest and recuperate right now, not to have you further harm her body." Having said this, uncaring as to whether the maidservant had anything further to say, Lu Zhu pushed the maidservant out of the room and shut the door crisply on her. "Miss, this servant has done well." Lu Zhu laughed loudly and said, "Let Yan Hua Yuan stew in their own troubles for a while. Miss received a shock last night, so today you have to eat something to replenish your body's energy. What tonic should I brew for you?" In Yan Hua Yuan, when Xia Yan heard Lin Lang's reply, she was so angry that she dashed her teacup to the ground. Gritting her teeth, she exclaimed, "How dare she? She could actually go so far as to say such brazen words. Everyone knows that she returned to the Fu with only a minor injury. That day when she jumped off the cliff, Xiao Xiao had personally rescued her. And today Jiang Xing had escorted her back to the Fu with such great fanfare. What did all of this mean?" She gazed at Jiang Su, who was lying on the bed, and a look of pain crossed her face. Jiang Ruan had the nerve to say her body was in poor health, but what about her sewer, now lying in bed with a ruined face? What could they do when she regained consciousness? Xia Yan clenched her fists tightly. There was still Jiang Chao, though who knew what was happening to him in the prison? Jiang Quan had already gone to negotiate with the official there. But the charge of colluding with rebels was not a small one. She had initially thought that Jiang Ruan was on pretty good terms with Xiao Xiao, and thought she might therefore be able to use Jiang Ruan to get Xiao Xiao to help with the matter. If she suggested that it was for the sake of the Jiangfu siblings, or for the sake of their reputation, Jiang Ruan could not refuse to ask for Xiao Xiao's help. Who knew that she would shut the door on her own people and offer such high-sounding reasons? Injured? Suffering from poor health? Bitch! Xia Yan clenched her fists. This situation was so critical, but Xia Cheng would not recklessly wade into these muddy waters due to self-preservation. What could they do? She wrestled with this problem for a while, then having made up her mind she said, "Bring me the keys to my storeroom." "What is foreign thinking of?" Li Momo asked. "One who is unwilling to take risks will not achieve anything. Right now, Chao's life is of utmost priority," Xia Yan said through gritted teeth. Asterisk she biu de hai zi tao biu zhu lang. Proverb. One who is not prepared to risk his child will never catch the wolf. Fig. One who is unwilling to take risks will not achieve great things. In the Jinying Wang Fu, Yi Feng knelt down without warning and said, "This subordinate has erred. Master, please punish me." He had blundered with the identity of Xiao Xiao's savior, and had even identified the enemy of Xiao Xiao's savior as the savior. Even if Yi Feng were to die 10 times over, it would still not be enough. He was not afraid of death, but instead feared that from henceforth Xiao Xiao would not allow him to stay by his side. He could not help but feel rather discouraged. Who could have guessed that Jiang Ruan would disguise herself as a maidservant and infiltrate the group? And it just so happened on that same day, the only person who was publicly stated as having gone to the temple to offer incense was second Jiang Miss. It was really ill-fated. Xiao Xiao said impassively, "Go to Bai Zhonglu to receive your punishment." Yi Feng breathed a sigh of relief, only to hear Xiao Xiao continue, "Genie will temporarily fill your position." Yi Feng. Yi Feng left with his head hanging low. As he exited, he caught sight of Steward Lin, who was listening by the door. His face full of sympathy, Steward Lin said, "Ah Feng, how did you provoke Wang Yi to anger? Hey wait, don't walk so fast. Tell me what happened last night between Wang Yi and eldest Jiang Miss. How did it come to pass that he jumped down to save her?" Xiao Xiao waited for Yi Feng to leave before he picked up his brush to write a few words on the paper before him, then rolled the paper into a little scroll and inserted it into a small, perfectly straight copper tube. He flicked the bell on the table and a pure snowy white pigeon flew in through the window, calling out "Goo goo," and perched on the table. Xiao Xiao tied the copper tube onto the snowy pigeon's foot. It tilted its head to look at him and extended its beak to peck at his fingers several times. Xiao Xiao stroked its head before raising his hand, whereupon the bird flew out of the window. He lowered his head, and his gaze fell upon the jade Dai Lian Hua pendant earring on the table. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.